Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, was born around 600 BCE in a time of political instability and intrigue. His birth, marked by divine omens and prophecies, would later become the foundation for a legendary story that changed the course of history. As the son of Cambyses I, the king of Anshan, and Mandane, a princess from the Median royal family, Cyrus's early years were intertwined with the political tensions between the Persians and the Medes. The region was a patchwork of competing empires, each vying for dominance. The Medes, under their king Astyages, had recently consolidated power in the region, but the rise of the Persians under Cambyses, though minor at the time, was already causing unease. Astyages, who ruled over both the Medes and the Persians, had a vision that would forever alter the course of his reign and the fate of his kingdom. Legend has it that, while Mandane was pregnant with Cyrus, Astyages, seeking to maintain his power, consulted his royal astrologers. They foretold that Mandane's son would one day rise to overthrow the Medes. In fear of this prophecy, Astyages ordered the death of the infant. But fate, it seems, had other plans. The baby was saved by a compassionate servant named Mithridates, who, after receiving the order to kill the newborn, instead spared his life. The servant abandoned the child in the wilderness, where fate again intervened when a shepherd named Atridates discovered the baby and took him into his care. Raised as the son of the shepherd, Cyrus grew up unaware of his royal lineage, surrounded by simple yet kind-hearted people who nurtured him. As Cyrus grew, so did his natural leadership abilities. Even as a young child, he displayed a strong sense of justice, a desire to lead, and an innate charisma that made others follow him. But it wasn't until a fateful moment during a childhood game that his true identity would be revealed. As young Cyrus played with the other children in his village, a moment of fate occurred that would set his life on an entirely new path. The children, unaware of his royal blood, were playing a game where they mimicked their elders, each child pretending to be a king or a noble ruler. Cyrus, however, stood out even among his peers. He took on the role of the king and displayed remarkable leadership, commanding the others with such authority that even the adults were taken aback. The game took a serious turn when the children decided to capture one another, and when Cyrus, as the king, led a successful effort to overthrow the other children. His actions attracted the attention of a nobleman who happened to be watching from afar. This nobleman, witnessing Cyrus's natural strength and charisma, believed he had seen something extraordinary in the child. The behavior displayed by the young boy matched the prophecy that had long been feared by the Medes. Realizing the significance of the moment, the nobleman reported back to King Astyages, who was now becoming increasingly paranoid about the truth of the prophecy. He ordered an investigation into the child's background. The truth, long buried, was finally revealed. The boy was indeed the son of Cambyses I, the Persian king. This revelation sent shockwaves through the court of Astyages. The king, now aware that the prophecy was coming to life before his very eyes, felt his worst fears confirmed. His own grandson, raised as a shepherd boy, was the one who would one day challenge his rule. Astyages, despite his earlier attempts to destroy Cyrus, realized that the child had not only survived but thrived, growing into a young man with the skills and abilities to one day lead an empire. With this discovery, the narrative of Cyrus's early life shifted. From a boy destined to be discarded, he was now set to become a central figure in the political landscape of the ancient world. Yet, King Astyages' reaction was far from resigned. Instead of meekly accepting fate, he decided to act once more, determined to prevent the prophecy from coming to fruition at all costs. King Astyages, now fully aware that his own grandchild was destined to overthrow him, responded with a blend of fury and fear. The prophecy that had haunted him for so long could no longer be ignored. Desperate to maintain his grip on the throne, Astyages summoned his advisors and royal council to discuss the situation. There was no longer any ambiguity. Cyrus, though raised by a shepherd, was the child foretold to bring an end to the Median Empire. Astyages' first reaction was one of fury. The astrologers had predicted that the child would be a threat, and yet they had failed to prevent his rise. To rid himself of this perceived threat once and for all, Astyages decided to bring Cyrus back to the palace, perhaps to reassert control over him, or, if necessary, to eliminate the danger. He ordered that Cyrus be brought back from the remote village where he had been living. Despite the harsh measures of Astyages, fate once again intervened. As Cyrus made his way back to the royal palace, he was greeted with a mixture of curiosity and awe. The people had heard of the boy who had been destined for greatness, but seeing him now, in the very heart of the Median Empire, was another matter entirely. Cyrus, at this point, was not just the son of Cambyses but a figure of immense interest. His reputation had preceded him. He was known for his courage, his fairness, and his natural ability to lead. Upon returning to the palace, Astyages tried to act swiftly. He initially sought to discredit Cyrus by introducing him to the court under less than favorable circumstances, hoping that this would tarnish the young man's image. However, even in the face of these manipulations, Cyrus stood his ground. He exhibited the strength, intelligence, and charisma that would define his future reign. His ability to speak with confidence and authority impressed those around him, and it quickly became clear that the young man's destiny could not be erased. Despite Astyages' fear and his desire to neutralize the prophecy, it became evident that Cyrus had the potential to unite both the Medes and the Persians under his rule. His charm, natural leadership, and undeniable connection with the people of both cultures made it impossible for Astyages to simply dismiss him. Now, the battle for the throne was no longer one of mere prophecy. It was a tangible, inevitable conflict between the old order and the rise of a new ruler who had the support of his people. The moment had arrived. The prophecy that Astyages had tried so desperately to suppress could no longer be ignored. With Cyrus now openly in the royal court, the tension between the two men, grandfather and grandson, became unbearable. The king's fears were amplified, and his grip on the throne seemed more fragile by the day. Yet, despite Astyages' efforts, the spirit of rebellion began to stir within the empire, and Cyrus's destiny was being forged not only by the prophecy, but by the political. Cyrus's early life, which had been spent far from the court, had allowed him to observe the Medes from a unique perspective. His humble upbringing in the countryside had given him an understanding of the needs of the people, an understanding that Astyages, born into privilege and royal power, lacked. This empathy for the common people of both Persia and Media became one of Cyrus's most powerful tools, one that he would use to rally the masses against the tyranny of his grandfather's rule. As the years passed, the conflict between the Medes and the Persians only deepened. The Medes, once the dominant force in the region, had grown complacent under Astyages' reign. They ruled with arrogance, believing their superiority over the Persians was unquestionable. But Cyrus, with his unique position as both a Persian by birth and a Median by blood, represented the perfect leader for a united front. His lineage gave him a claim to the throne, but it was his charisma and vision that inspired the people to follow him. One of the key turning points came when Cyrus, with the support of his Persian allies and growing discontent within the Median ranks, began to challenge the authority of Astyages. The young prince was no longer content to be a mere figurehead in the royal palace. He sought to take the throne for himself, as the prophecy had foretold. The political climate of the time had changed, and the people began to look to Cyrus not as a threat, but as a liberator. The first step in his rebellion came when he gathered a small army of loyal Persian soldiers and began to march towards the Median capital. Astyages, who had relied on his own soldiers to protect him, was slow to react. As news of Cyrus's growing force spread, more and more soldiers and nobles defected to Cyrus's side, recognizing his potential as a ruler who would bring justice and reform to the empire. In a matter of months, Cyrus's once small army swelled in numbers. The Medes, unprepared for such an uprising, found themselves fighting a losing battle. And yet, the greatest challenge was still to come. In a final confrontation, Astyages would have to face the truth. The prophecy had come true, and Cyrus would be the one to take the throne. With the fall of Astyages and the defeat of the Medes, Cyrus the Great became the undisputed ruler of a vast and powerful empire. However, his true genius lay not only in his military victories, but also in his ability to govern a diverse and multi-ethnic empire. Unlike many conquerors of his time, Cyrus sought to integrate the peoples he conquered into his rule rather than subjugate them through fear. Cyrus's first act as king was to unite the Persians and Medes under one banner, ensuring a delicate balance of power between the two peoples. He was careful to maintain the cultural and political autonomy of the Medes, even as he absorbed their lands and resources into his growing empire. This act of tolerance and respect for the cultures and traditions of his conquered subjects set the tone for Cyrus's reign. Beyond his diplomatic genius, Cyrus's military prowess remained unparalleled. As he expanded his empire into Babylon, Egypt, and beyond, he not only relied on his formidable army, but also utilized alliances, diplomacy, and strategic marriages to solidify his rule. His innovative approach to governance and his ability to win the loyalty of his subjects through fairness and respect became the hallmark of his reign. Cyrus's victory over the Medes and his subsequent rise to power transformed the political landscape of the ancient world. It marked the beginning of the Achaemenid Empire, a dynasty that would become one of the largest and most influential empires in history. Under Cyrus's leadership, the Persian Empire grew into a sprawling, multi-ethnic state that stretched from the Indus Valley to Egypt and from the Caucasus Mountains to the Arabian Desert. Cyrus the Great, born under the shadow of prophecy, not only fulfilled his destiny as a conqueror, but also laid the foundations for one of the most enduring empires the world has ever known. His reign would go on to inspire future generations of rulers and leave an indelible mark on history. The year 550 BCE marked the beginning of a transformative period in Persian history. Cyrus, having grown from the shepherd boy into a leader of men, was no longer the passive grandson of Astyages. With his royal bloodline and growing influence, he began to stir unrest among the Persians, who had long lived under the oppressive rule of the Medes. The tensions between the two peoples, once bound by a shared history, were now on the verge of boiling over. Cyrus had already proved himself as a capable leader during his early years, displaying strategic acumen and charisma that made him well-liked among the Persian people. However, it was his strong sense of justice and desire for his people's freedom that set him apart. Under the rule of Astyages, the Persians had long been subjugated, their autonomy restricted, while the Medes continued to hold the reins of power. The resentment among the Persian nobles and commoners alike had been brewing for years, and Cyrus, with his royal lineage and natural leadership, became a figure of hope and resistance. The growing sentiment for rebellion was not lost on Cyrus. He understood that to rise to power, he needed to rally not just the Persians, but also key figures within the Medes who were dissatisfied with Astyages' leadership. The king of the Medes was seen as a tyrant by many in his own empire, with his increasingly paranoid rule alienating both allies and subjects. However, Cyrus's rise was not just driven by a desire for personal power. It was rooted in the growing desire for liberation among the Persian people. As the Medes grew more oppressive, the Persians became more desperate for a change. This collective discontent laid the foundation for what would become a legendary rebellion. Cyrus knew that his moment to strike would come when the right allies and conditions aligned. At this stage, he began to gather loyal supporters who would help him in his quest to overthrow Astyages. Through careful diplomacy and covert alliances, Cyrus quietly amassed an army ready to fight for a new Persian empire. Though the time had not yet arrived to challenge Astyages directly, the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. The seeds of rebellion had been planted, and the winds of change began to blow ever stronger in Persia. Cyrus's ambition had taken root, and he was now preparing to make his move, one that would forever change the history of the ancient world. By 550 BCE, Cyrus's reputation had grown, not only among the Persians, but also within the ranks of the Medes. His ability to unite people, even from opposing factions, was becoming apparent. As the discontent with Astyages' rule reached a boiling point, Cyrus began to assemble a coalition of Persian nobles and dissatisfied Median allies, each with their own grievances against the aging king. The foundation of his power lay in this web of alliances, many of which were formed in secret. Cyrus knew that to overthrow Astyages, he would need more than just a handful of disgruntled allies. He needed an army capable of taking on the might of the Median Empire. So, he began to build a force, carefully choosing men who were loyal to him and who believed in the dream of a free Persia. His leadership and vision inspired many to rally behind him, and soon his army began to grow in size and strength. Despite being outnumbered by the Median forces, Cyrus's army was more disciplined and motivated. He strategically used his position as both a royal heir and a leader of the oppressed to rally troops from both Persia and Median territories. His call for justice and the promise of a better future for his people resonated with many soldiers, both Persian and Median, who had grown weary of Astyages' harsh rule. Cyrus's military tactics also began to take shape during this time. Unlike many rulers who relied solely on brute force, Cyrus understood the importance of strategy, diplomacy, and morale in warfare. He made sure his troops were not only trained in combat, but were also deeply loyal to him and his cause. His leadership was characterized by his ability to inspire and maintain the morale of his men, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In addition to building his army, Cyrus also expanded his influence by gaining the support of several key regions in Persia. His charisma and leadership appealed to many of the smaller tribes that had long been subjugated by the Medes. By promising them greater autonomy and a chance to rule their own territories under his leadership, Cyrus was able to secure important alliances that would be crucial in his fight against Astyages. Now, with an increasingly powerful and unified army, Cyrus was ready to take the next step. The time had come to challenge the Median Empire, and the growing support for his cause ensured that the Persian revolt would not be easily suppressed. With his allies in place and his forces at the ready, Cyrus was about to strike a blow against the Medes that would change the course of history forever. The moment of reckoning had arrived. In 550 BCE, Cyrus, now with a strong and loyal army behind him, was ready to challenge Astyages' rule. The first major confrontation between the forces of Cyrus and the Medes would come to be known as the Battle of Parsa, a pivotal moment that would define the fate of the Persian Empire. Cyrus had carefully chosen his time and place to strike. The battle took place near the ancient Persian city of Parsa, a significant stronghold for his people. It was here that Cyrus's forces would face Astyages' much larger and better equipped army. However, Cyrus's strategic mind and the loyalty of his soldiers would prove more valuable than sheer numbers. Before the battle, Cyrus took every precaution to ensure his men were fully prepared for the fight. He knew that Astyages' forces, despite their size, were demoralized and divided. The Median king had failed to inspire his troops, and many were disillusioned with his rule. This lack of unity would prove to be Astyages' greatest weakness, while Cyrus's forces were motivated by a singular cause: freedom from Median tyranny and the establishment of a new Persian empire. Cyrus, a brilliant strategist, utilized guerrilla tactics to counter the advantage of Astyages' larger force. His troops were nimble and quick, striking swiftly and then retreating into the cover of the terrain. His knowledge of the local geography allowed him to set up ambushes, making it difficult for the Median army to track or predict his movements. Astyages, on the other hand, relied on traditional formations and heavy, direct combat, which played into Cyrus's strengths. As the battle unfolded, the morale of the Median troops rapidly declined. Many of them, having been fighting under a king they no longer respected, began to waver. In contrast, the soldiers under Cyrus's command fought with determination and passion. The battle was not only a fight for land, but for their freedom and their future. In a decisive moment of the battle, Cyrus's forces launched a full assault on the heart of Astyages' army, breaking through their lines. The clash was brutal, but the battle ended in a resounding victory for Cyrus. Astyages' army, once formidable, had been outmaneuvered and defeated. The great Median king was forced to flee the battlefield, ultimately surrendering to Cyrus. The Battle of Parsa was a turning point. It marked the beginning of Cyrus's rise as the leader of both the Persians and the Medes. Astyages, once a king who held dominion over an empire, was now captured and humiliated, forced into submission by his own grandson. Cyrus's victory at Parsa was not only a military triumph. It was the first step toward the creation of the largest empire the world had ever known. With the Medes defeated, Cyrus solidified his position as the rightful ruler of the Persian territories and began to focus on consolidating his power. But the true challenge lay ahead. Although the Medes were vanquished, Cyrus's empire was only beginning to take shape, and many more challenges awaited him. Following his decisive victory at the Battle of Parsa, Cyrus's rise to power accelerated rapidly. The fall of the Median king, Astyages, was not merely a personal defeat for the ruler, but a collapse of the entire Median Empire. With Astyages' army broken and the Medes in disarray, Cyrus's next move was to consolidate his power across the lands he had just claimed. After his victory, Cyrus turned his attention to the heart of the Median Empire, Ecbatana, the capital city of the Medes. In a striking display of both military prowess and political acumen, Cyrus offered Astyages a chance to surrender. Though it was a calculated move, the offer to spare Astyages' life was also symbolic, a gesture that demonstrated Cyrus's political maturity and strategic vision. Astyages, now a broken man, had little choice but to surrender. With Astyages' capture, the Medes were effectively defeated. Cyrus's forces marched into Ecbatana, where the city gates, once closed to the Persians, now opened to their new king. The fall of the capital symbolized the end of the Median Empire and the rise of a new order. However, Cyrus's handling of the situation would prove to be one of the key reasons for his eventual success in uniting the Persians and Medes under his rule. Rather than seeking revenge on the Median nobility or executing his grandfather, Cyrus adopted a policy of clemency. He treated the defeated Medes with respect and invited their nobles to join his administration. This decision was both practical and symbolic, showing that Cyrus's reign would be different from the tyranny of Astyages. Instead of ruling through fear and oppression, he sought to rule through loyalty and cooperation. Cyrus's diplomatic tact allowed him to effectively bring the Medes into his new empire. He didn't force them into submission. Instead, he integrated them into his administration, relying on their experience and expertise to help govern the newly expanded empire. Many former Median officials were given prominent positions in Cyrus's government, ensuring that the transition of power was smooth and that the new empire benefited from the established infrastructure and resources of the Medes. With the fall of Astyages, the Persians were no longer a subordinate people. They were now masters of their destiny, under the leadership of their new king, Cyrus. This marked the beginning of the Achaemenid Empire, a multi-ethnic empire that would go on to become one of the largest in history. The consolidation of power, however, did not mean peace. Though the Medes had been subdued, Cyrus still had to deal with the internal challenges of unifying Persia, as well as the external threats posed by rival empires, particularly Lydia and Babylon. His diplomatic and military strategies would soon be put to the test again as he turned his focus outward, preparing to expand his empire even further. Having successfully consolidated his rule over the Medes, Cyrus now set his sights on expanding the Persian Empire, and the first major challenge came from the west, Lydia. At the time, Lydia was ruled by King Croesus, a wealthy and powerful monarch who had built one of the most formidable kingdoms in Asia Minor. Croesus, known for his immense fortune, had long been a significant power player in the region, and his ambitions were well known. His kingdom bordered Cyrus's newly expanded empire, and it was only a matter of time before their paths would cross. Croesus, hearing of Cyrus's rising power, initially underestimated the Persian king. Confident in the strength of his army and his immense wealth, Croesus believed that his forces could easily crush any potential threat posed by the Persians. He sent ambassadors to Cyrus, offering him gifts and a promise of alliance. But it was clear that Croesus saw this as a way to test Cyrus's resolve. Instead of seeking an alliance, Cyrus responded with defiance, sending back a message that would signal the beginning of a long and bitter conflict. The war between Lydia and Persia was fought on multiple fronts. Croesus, expecting a swift victory, underestimated the strategic brilliance of Cyrus. The Persian king's army, though smaller, was more disciplined, and his tactics outmaneuvered the Lydian forces. As the two armies met on the battlefield, Cyrus's forces proved to be more effective in combat, using their superior tactics and speed to outflank the Lydians. The Lydian army, though powerful, was not as unified or as motivated as Cyrus's soldiers, many of whom were fighting for their homeland's freedom and prosperity. Despite several battles, the decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Thymbra, near the Lydian capital of Sardis. Croesus, despite his wealth and military experience, found himself at a disadvantage. In this critical battle, Cyrus's forces used clever tactics to break the Lydian lines. The Persians, knowing that Croesus relied heavily on his cavalry, set up a series of traps and ambushes that neutralized Lydia's advantage. When Croesus's cavalry was outmaneuvered, the rest of his army crumbled. The battle was a decisive victory for Cyrus. Croesus, now a prisoner, was brought before Cyrus, who, despite being victorious, showed respect to the fallen king. Instead of executing him, Cyrus spared Croesus's life, demonstrating his policy of clemency. Cyrus's wisdom in showing mercy to Croesus helped secure the loyalty of the Lydians, who, seeing their king's survival, were more willing to accept the new order under Persian rule. The fall of Lydia not only expanded Cyrus's empire, but also brought with it immense wealth. The treasures of Croesus, which had been the envy of the ancient world, were now under the control of the Persian Empire. The acquisition of Lydia marked another significant step in Cyrus's quest to create an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. With Lydia subdued, Cyrus was now one of the most powerful rulers in the world. However, his ambitions were far from satisfied. The next step in his grand strategy would involve the conquest of Babylon, a challenge that would test his leadership and further cement his legacy as one of history's greatest conquerors. After defeating Lydia, Cyrus's empire now spanned much of the ancient Near East, but his most significant challenge still lay ahead: the mighty kingdom of Babylon. Babylon, under King Nabonidus, had long been a dominant power in the region, controlling vast territories, including much of Mesopotamia. The Babylonians were also renowned for their wealth, culture, and military might, making them a formidable opponent. For years, Babylon had been a rising power in the region, and it was clear that its influence posed a direct threat to Cyrus's expanding empire. But Cyrus, ever the strategic genius, recognized that Babylon was not just a military threat. It was also a political and religious center. The Babylonians were proud of their ancient traditions, and Nabonidus, though a skilled ruler, was unpopular due to his focus on religious reforms that alienated many of his subjects. In particular, Nabonidus's neglect of the Babylonian god Marduk had created discontent among the Babylonian priests and citizens, many of whom had begun to see Cyrus as a more legitimate and favorable ruler. Cyrus, with his keen understanding of both military strategy and the political landscape, saw an opportunity. He knew that by aligning himself with the discontented factions within Babylon, he could gain support from the very people who had grown tired of their king. While preparing for war, Cyrus also made diplomatic overtures, presenting himself as a liberator who would restore Marduk to his rightful place and bring peace and prosperity to the people of Babylon. In 539 BCE, Cyrus's forces, with a large army at his command, marched toward the gates of Babylon. Unlike the campaigns in Lydia and Media, Cyrus's approach to Babylon was less about brute force and more about psychological warfare. He had spent months preparing for the siege, ensuring that his army was well-equipped and ready for any eventuality. But he also understood that the key to success in Babylon lay not only in military might, but in diplomacy and the support of the Babylonian people. As the Persian army approached Babylon, the city's defenses, though strong, were not enough to hold off the invaders. Cyrus had been studying the Euphrates River, which ran through the heart of the city. He devised a brilliant plan to divert the river's flow, lowering the water level so that his army could enter through the now exposed riverbed. This tactical move allowed the Persian forces to bypass the city's mighty walls, and with little resistance, the Persians entered Babylon. The conquest of Babylon was swift and almost bloodless. Many of the city's residents, having grown weary of Nabonidus's rule, welcomed Cyrus as a liberator. The priests of Marduk, seeing Cyrus as the fulfillment of their prophecies, threw their support behind him, further ensuring the smooth transition of power. Nabonidus, seeing that the tide had turned, fled the city, and Cyrus declared himself the ruler of Babylon. One of the most famous symbols of Cyrus's benevolent rule came with the Cyrus cylinder, an ancient artifact that described his actions in Babylon. On this cylinder, Cyrus outlined his policies of religious tolerance and respect for local customs. Rather than destroy the Babylonian temples and impose Persian customs, Cyrus allowed the Babylonians to continue worshipping their gods, particularly Marduk, whom Nabonidus had neglected. This act of cultural sensitivity won Cyrus the loyalty of the people and demonstrated his commitment to a just and tolerant rule. The conquest of Babylon marked the culmination of Cyrus's rise to power. With the fall of the Babylonians, Cyrus's empire was now the largest the world had ever seen, stretching from the Aegean Sea in the west to the Indus River in the east. Cyrus had not only built an empire through military conquest, but had also established a legacy of tolerance and respect for diverse cultures and religions. This approach would define his reign and set a precedent for future rulers of the Achaemenid Empire. Cyrus's conquest of Babylon also solidified his status as one of history's greatest rulers. His empire was not just a collection of conquered lands. It was a unified state that valued its diverse peoples and cultures. Under his rule, the Persian Empire would go on to thrive for centuries, becoming a model of governance that would influence empires for generations to come. With Babylon under his control, Cyrus turned his attention to consolidating his empire, ensuring that the diverse peoples within his domain lived in harmony. But the challenges of governing such a vast empire were not over. Though Cyrus had achieved remarkable success in his early years, his final years would see the empire face new challenges that would test the legacy he had so carefully built. By 539 BCE, Lydia was one of the most powerful kingdoms in the ancient world, and its king, Croesus, was renowned not only for his military prowess, but also for his immense wealth. Lydia's control over the prosperous region of Asia Minor, combined with its lucrative trade routes and vast resources, made it a dominant force in the ancient world. Under Croesus's rule, Lydia had reached the height of its power, and its capital, Sardis, became a symbol of both wealth and military might. Croesus, whose name is still synonymous with riches, ascended to the throne in 560 BCE and quickly solidified his reign. His wealth, accumulated from the rich gold mines of the region and successful military campaigns, made Lydia a target for envy and ambition. However, it was Croesus's expansionist ambitions and his strategic thinking that truly set him apart. He sought to extend Lydia's borders and influence by engaging in military campaigns that took him into neighboring territories, including Media, Phoenicia, and the Greek city-states on the Aegean coast. But it wasn't just his military conquest that made Croesus famous. It was also his diplomatic relationships. He was well known for his alliances with powerful figures of the time, including Egypt's pharaoh Amasis and the Greek city-states. His advisors often counseled him on the best ways to ensure Lydia's dominance, and Croesus, with his ambition to expand, relied on both his alliances and his wealth to strengthen his position in the region. However, despite his success and status, Croesus's reign was not without its challenges. In particular, he had a growing concern about the rise of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. While Lydia had thrived for decades, the expansion of Cyrus's influence in the east posed a direct threat. As Cyrus conquered the Median Empire, Croesus began to view the young Persian king as a potential rival who could undo all the work he had done in establishing Lydia's dominance. At the time, Croesus believed that the Persian threat could be neutralized through a series of well-timed alliances and military actions. But he underestimated the brilliance and strategy of Cyrus, whose ambition was not just to defend his empire, but to expand it across the known world. While Croesus plotted his next move, Cyrus's forces were already preparing for their own campaigns. This would set the stage for the confrontation that would bring down one of the wealthiest and most powerful kingdoms in the ancient world, the fall of Lydia. As the growing power of Cyrus and the rise of the Persian Empire became more apparent, King Croesus of Lydia began to take decisive action. Convinced that Persia posed a direct threat to his kingdom, Croesus made the fateful decision to launch a preemptive strike, intending to defeat Cyrus before he could extend his reach further westward into Lydia. Croesus, confident in his military might and backed by his vast wealth, felt secure in his decision. One of Croesus's first steps was to seek alliances. He knew that confronting the Persians would require more than just the might of Lydia's army. Croesus was no stranger to diplomacy, and, knowing that Persia's rise could disrupt the balance of power in the region, he turned to some of the most powerful neighbors of the time for help. His first alliance was with the Greek city-states, particularly Sparta, whose warriors were renowned for their strength and skill in battle. He also sought to solidify ties with Egypt, whose king Amasis was a trusted ally. These alliances, however, were more a product of Croesus's desperation than a genuine mutual interest in maintaining the status quo. While the Greek city-states were eager to help fend off the Persian threat, their commitment was uncertain, and Egypt, dealing with its own internal issues, was not as dependable a partner as Croesus had hoped. Despite these shaky alliances, Croesus believed that he had the strength to stand alone. He mobilized his forces, preparing them for a confrontation with Cyrus's growing army. Croesus's army, bolstered by the wealth and resources of Lydia, was a formidable force, with well-equipped soldiers, cavalry, and a robust treasury to fund the campaign. He also had access to elite mercenaries from Greek city-states, further strengthening his army. One of the most notable features of the Lydian military was its cavalry, renowned throughout the ancient world. Croesus relied heavily on this cavalry to carry out swift and decisive strikes. In addition, his army had a strong core of archers and infantry, making the Lydian military versatile and capable of confronting any challenge on the battlefield. With this powerful military in place, Croesus felt ready to meet Cyrus head-on. However, what Croesus failed to fully appreciate was the strategic brilliance of Cyrus, who had already begun to make moves that would neutralize Croesus's advantages. Cyrus's forces, though smaller, were far more disciplined, and his tactics were designed to outmaneuver larger, more conventional armies. Cyrus's soldiers were fiercely loyal, and his understanding of terrain, psychology, and warfare had already proven to be a game-changer in previous battles. Croesus's preparations, while impressive, were rooted in the belief that his wealth, his allies, and his military strength could easily crush Cyrus. But Cyrus's rise had proven that traditional methods of warfare and alliances could only carry one so far. The stage was now set for a battle that would test the mettle of both leaders. As Croesus prepared for war against the Persians, he sought counsel from a source he trusted implicitly, the famous Oracle of Delphi. The oracle was known throughout the ancient world for its cryptic prophecies and was considered the most powerful and influential in Greece. Croesus, anxious about his impending conflict with Cyrus, sent emissaries to Delphi to seek guidance on his campaign. Upon arriving at the oracle, the priest delivered a prophecy that would prove to be both a source of hope and, ultimately, a tragic misinterpretation for Croesus. The oracle's words were cryptic, as they always were, but the message was clear enough for Croesus to interpret as a sign of victory. If you cross the river, a great empire will be destroyed. Croesus, confident in his military strength and certain that the Persian Empire was destined for destruction, took this prophecy as a divine endorsement of his campaign against Cyrus. He believed that the great empire mentioned by the oracle referred to Persia, and this confirmation of his own strength filled him with a sense of invincibility. The prophecy emboldened Croesus. He interpreted it as a sign that he would defeat Cyrus and that the Persian Empire was doomed. The great wealth he had accumulated, coupled with the strength of his alliances and military, gave him further confidence in his ability to win. Croesus was so convinced of his success that he took the oracle's words as an absolute truth and decided to move forward with his plans without hesitation. However, this decision would prove to be a grave mistake, as it was based on a misinterpretation of the oracle's prophecy. The prophecy had been deliberately vague, as oracles often were, leaving ample room for personal interpretation. The great empire the oracle spoke of was not Persia, it was Lydia itself. In his overconfidence, Croesus had failed to consider that the oracle's prophecy might not be a guarantee of his success, but rather a forewarning of his own downfall. With the blessing of the oracle in mind, Croesus crossed the river Halys, a significant geographical boundary, marking the official beginning of his campaign against Persia. As his army marched forward into the heart of Persian territory, he felt assured that victory was within his grasp. His troops were confident, and the morale was high. They were marching to war with the belief that they were destined to destroy the Persian Empire, just as the oracle had foretold. But the gap between confidence and reality would soon become painfully evident. Croesus's failure to heed the more subtle elements of the prophecy and his over-reliance on divine signs blinded him to the tactical brilliance of Cyrus. As Croesus advanced deeper into Persian territory, he had little idea that the Persian king, far from being the weak and inexperienced ruler Croesus assumed, was already preparing a counteroffensive that would shatter the Lydian forces. The inevitable confrontation between the forces of Croesus and Cyrus took place near the town of Thymbra in 546 BCE. Croesus, having crossed the Halys River with his massive army, felt certain that victory was within his reach. His forces, vastly superior in numbers and equipped with elite cavalry and heavy infantry, seemed an overwhelming match for Cyrus's smaller and less experienced troops. However, the battle would prove to be a testament to the military genius of Cyrus, whose tactical brilliance turned the tide in his favor. Upon reaching Thymbra, Croesus confidently set up his camp, certain that Cyrus's army, being outnumbered and exhausted, would falter. But Cyrus, far from feeling threatened, had already formulated a strategy that would neutralize the advantages of Croesus's larger force. The Persian king knew that a direct confrontation would be costly, and that the key to victory lay in outsmarting the Lydian king, not overpowering him with sheer numbers. Cyrus's first move was to employ an unconventional tactic. Instead of engaging in a full frontal assault, he used a smaller, more nimble force to harass the Lydian army's flank, creating the illusion of disarray and confusion within his own ranks. Croesus, believing this was a sign of weakness, ordered a full charge, determined to crush the Persians before they could regroup. This rash decision would play directly into Cyrus's hands. As the Lydian cavalry charged forward, Cyrus had already prepared a clever trap. The terrain at Thymbra had been carefully studied by Persian scouts, and Cyrus's forces had dug trenches and concealed pits along the battlefield. As the Lydian cavalry surged forward, they unknowingly rode into these traps, becoming bogged down and vulnerable. The Lydian cavalry, once the pride of their army, was now rendered ineffective, and many were thrown into disarray. Meanwhile, Cyrus's infantry, positioned strategically behind the traps, began to close in on the Lydian forces. The Persians, using their superior discipline and coordination, executed a well-timed counterattack, pushing the Lydian army into further chaos. Croesus's forces, once confident and unified, now found themselves overwhelmed and unable to regroup. The battle quickly turned into a rout. The Lydian army, despite its initial strength, was broken by the unexpected tactics and relentless pressure from Cyrus's forces. Croesus's plan to strike quickly and decisively had failed spectacularly. The Battle of Thymbra was a decisive victory for Cyrus, who had once again proven that military strategy was more important than the sheer size of an army. Croesus, realizing that the battle was lost, attempted to flee the battlefield with what remained of his forces. However, the Persian army pursued him relentlessly. Croesus, now a defeated king, was left to contemplate the cost of his overconfidence and the misreading of the oracle's prophecy. The defeat at Thymbra not only shattered the Lydian military, but also marked the beginning of the end for his kingdom. The victory at Thymbra was not just a military triumph for Cyrus. It also symbolized the beginning of the Persian Empire's dominance in the ancient world. With the fall of Lydia, Cyrus's reputation as a brilliant strategist and conqueror grew exponentially, and his empire continued to expand, soon to include the riches of Lydia and the strength of its formidable military. After his decisive victory at the Battle of Thymbra, Cyrus knew the downfall of Lydia was inevitable. The Lydian king, Croesus, had suffered a crushing defeat and, despite his earlier overconfidence, now found himself in a dire position. His once mighty kingdom was unraveling, and his personal fate hung in the balance. With his army in disarray and his capital, Sardis, exposed, Croesus retreated to the city, hoping to make a stand. Sardis was a formidable city, built atop a high hill and surrounded by strong walls. It seemed an impenetrable fortress, and Croesus believed it would be the last line of defense for his kingdom. His confidence was not entirely misplaced. The Lydians had successfully repelled invaders in the past, and they had considerable resources and a well-fortified city. However, Croesus's hope in Sardis's defenses would prove to be misplaced. Cyrus, ever the brilliant strategist, knew that a prolonged siege would be costly and time-consuming, and he was determined to end the war swiftly. His army, though smaller, was highly disciplined, and Cyrus's previous successes had earned him the loyalty and determination of his soldiers. He was also aware of Sardis's vulnerabilities, which Croesus had failed to recognize. Cyrus's forces quickly set up camp outside Sardis, and a siege began. The Lydian king, confident that his city's walls could hold off the Persians, initially showed little concern. However, Cyrus was not just relying on military might. He employed a more ingenious tactic. He sent a small force to scale the cliffs surrounding the city. As Cyrus had carefully studied the geography of the region, he knew of a narrow, almost hidden path that led to the top of the walls. One of Cyrus's most brilliant commanders, named Harpagus, led the stealthy operation. Under the cover of night, they quietly ascended the cliffs, and by dawn, they had reached the gates of Sardis. The Lydian defenders, caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of the Persians inside the city, were overwhelmed. The Persian forces poured through the gates, and Sardis, once thought to be impregnable, fell within a matter of hours. Croesus, who had once been a king surrounded by luxury and wealth, now found himself trapped within his own city. His last hopes were shattered as Cyrus's forces poured into the capital. With no other recourse, Croesus, who had once been so confident in his fate, was taken captive. The king who had once ruled over an empire renowned for its wealth and power was now a prisoner of the very man he had underestimated. The fall of Sardis marked the end of Lydia as an independent kingdom and the beginning of Persian control over the region. Croesus, though defeated, was treated with a surprising degree of respect by Cyrus. Instead of being executed, he was spared, likely as part of Cyrus's policy of mercy and diplomacy, which was a hallmark of his leadership. The once mighty Lydian king was eventually brought before Cyrus, and the two men, despite being rivals, engaged in a conversation that would go down in history. The fall of Sardis was not just a military victory for Cyrus. It symbolized the end of an era. Lydia, with all its wealth and influence, was now part of the Persian Empire. The riches of Sardis, including its famous gold, were now under Cyrus's control, further solidifying his growing empire. With Lydia defeated, Cyrus could now focus on expanding his empire even further, knowing that no force in the region could stand against him. With the fall of Sardis, the wealth of Lydia, and the capture of Croesus, Cyrus had achieved a remarkable victory. Not only had he conquered one of the wealthiest and most powerful kingdoms of the ancient world, but he had also shown himself to be a ruler who understood the value of mercy, diplomacy, and cultural integration. Rather than executing Croesus, Cyrus allowed the former king to live, treating him with respect. This act of clemency would become a hallmark of Cyrus's reign, distinguishing him from other conquerors of the time, who would have executed a defeated king without hesitation. Following the capture of Sardis, Cyrus took control of Lydia's vast resources. The gold reserves, once under the control of Croesus, now flowed into the Persian treasury, strengthening Cyrus's position both economically and politically. This wealth would play a crucial role in supporting future military campaigns and securing alliances. With the riches of Lydia at his disposal, Cyrus was now able to finance an empire that stretched across vast territories, from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. Yet, while the wealth was a critical factor, the real success of Cyrus's conquest lay in his ability to integrate Lydia into the Persian Empire. He did not simply annex the region and impose Persian rule by force. Instead, he allowed the Lydians to retain their culture, traditions, and local governance. This policy of cultural tolerance helped to maintain stability within the empire and won the loyalty of many newly conquered peoples. By respecting the traditions and religions of those he conquered, Cyrus was able to create an empire built not on fear, but on cooperation and shared prosperity. The fall of Lydia also had a profound impact on the neighboring regions. It marked the final consolidation of Cyrus's rule in Asia Minor and solidified his position as the dominant power in the western part of the ancient world. With Lydia under his control, Cyrus was now poised to expand even further, setting his sights on the great city of Babylon, the last major power standing between him and complete dominance of the ancient Near East. In the aftermath of the Lydian conquest, Cyrus's fame as a military genius and compassionate ruler spread far and wide. His victory over Croesus and the fall of Sardis would be remembered not just as a military conquest, but as a turning point in the history of the ancient world. Cyrus's ability to unite diverse peoples under his rule and his willingness to embrace their customs and cultures would become the foundation of the Achaemenid Empire, one of the largest and most successful empires in history. For Croesus, his fate was sealed as a prisoner, though the exact details of his life after his capture are unclear. According to some accounts, Croesus remained in Cyrus's court for the rest of his life, living in relative comfort, but no longer as a king. Others suggest that Croesus was given a position of honor within the Persian administration, perhaps advising Cyrus on matters of governance and wealth. In any case, his legacy lived on, not just in the riches he had accumulated, but in the lessons he left behind of overconfidence, misinterpretation, and the dangers of underestimating a rival like Cyrus. The fall of Lydia and the defeat of Croesus marked another important chapter in Cyrus's rise to power, but it was also a moment of transformation for the ancient world. With Lydia subdued, the stage was set for Cyrus to turn his attention toward Babylon. By 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great had already transformed Persia into a dominant force in the ancient world. With the fall of Lydia and the defeat of Croesus, his empire stretched from the Aegean Sea to the edges of the Medes and the heart of Asia Minor. However, one major power still stood in his way: Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia. Babylon, under King Nabonidus, was the last major kingdom that could threaten Cyrus's vision of an empire stretching across the ancient Near East. Not only was Babylon one of the most prosperous and powerful cities of the time, but it also held immense strategic importance due to its location along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The city's riches, its legendary walls, and its influence over the surrounding regions made it a formidable opponent. For Cyrus to realize his grand ambition of unifying the entire region under Persian rule, Babylon was a prize that could not be left unchecked. Babylon's cultural and religious significance also played a key role in its importance. The city was a hub of ancient knowledge, art, and trade. It was home to the famous Hanging Gardens, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and its ziggurats and temples were architectural marvels. The city was a melting pot of different cultures, and its people worshipped various gods, with Marduk being the chief deity. Babylon was also a vital center of power and influence in the ancient world, making it a symbol of both wealth and divine favor. Despite Babylon's formidable status, it was also a kingdom in decline. Nabonidus, the king at the time, was unpopular, especially with the priesthood. His religious reforms, which promoted the worship of the moon god Sin over Marduk, angered many in Babylon, including the powerful priests of Marduk's temple. This alienation weakened the king's position and created an opportunity for Cyrus, who had a reputation for respecting local customs and religions. In contrast to Nabonidus, Cyrus had already demonstrated a policy of tolerance and respect for the cultures he conquered, which earned him the loyalty of the people. His military and diplomatic approach was not just about force, it was about winning hearts and minds. As he set his sights on Babylon, he understood that diplomacy, alongside military might, would be crucial in securing the city's fall. With his eyes firmly set on Babylon, Cyrus began to prepare for what would become one of the most remarkable campaigns in ancient history. His strategy would involve not only a military invasion, but also subtle political maneuvering. He knew that he needed to destabilize Babylon from within before engaging in open conflict, and that meant gaining the support of those who were already dissatisfied with Nabonidus's rule. As Cyrus prepared for his military campaign against Babylon, he knew that brute force alone would not guarantee his success. Babylon was a city famed for its formidable defenses and military might, and attacking it head-on would require careful planning and a calculated approach. Cyrus, always the shrewd strategist, recognized that gaining support within Babylon, particularly among those who were dissatisfied with the current rule, would be crucial in his efforts to conquer the city. The key to Cyrus's strategy was his diplomatic prowess. Unlike many conquerors who sought to impose their will with sheer military force, Cyrus understood the importance of aligning himself with the Babylonian people especially those who were disgruntled with Nabonidus's rule. One of the most significant factors working against the Babylonian king was his strained relationship with the priesthood of Marduk, the city's chief deity. Nabonidus had famously shifted his religious focus to the moon god Sin, which alienated the powerful priests of Marduk's temple and many of the Babylonians who still held Marduk in reverence. Cyrus, on the other hand, had earned a reputation for respecting the gods and cultures of the lands he conquered. He understood the power of religion in Babylon, and he saw an opportunity to present himself as the rightful ruler who would restore Marduk to his rightful place. To do this, he took careful steps to present himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror, and he began making overtures to the Babylonian priesthood, promising to restore Marduk's supremacy in Babylon. Cyrus's diplomatic messaging, carefully orchestrated to appeal to both the religious elites and the common people, began to resonate. He sent envoys to Babylon with declarations of goodwill, promising that his rule would not threaten Babylon's religion or cultural identity. By presenting himself as a pious ruler who respected the will of the gods, he was able to gain the favor of those who were disillusioned with Nabonidus. These acts of diplomacy, combined with the growing discontent with Nabonidus's rule, created a situation ripe for revolt. Additionally, Cyrus's reputation for mercy and his policy of cultural tolerance played a significant role in winning the hearts and minds of the Babylonian people. He had already shown that he would not destroy the cities he conquered or impose Persian customs on them. Instead, he sought to govern with respect for local traditions, which made him appealing to those who feared the possibility of Nabonidus's harsh rule continuing under the guise of Babylonian nationalism. Cyrus also had an ally in the Babylonian military. Nabonidus, despite his wealth and power, had left the defense of Babylon in the hands of his son, Belshazzar, who was seen by many as inexperienced and ineffective. Belshazzar's inability to maintain control and the weakening grip of his father's rule further played into Cyrus's hands. The Babylonian people, particularly the military and the priesthood, began to look at Cyrus not just as an external threat, but as a potential savior who would liberate them from an unpopular ruler. As the political landscape in Babylon began to shift, Cyrus continued his preparations. His army, though smaller than the Babylonians, was well-disciplined, well-supplied, and motivated by the promise of a prosperous future under Persian rule. Cyrus had already earned the loyalty of his subjects through a series of successful campaigns and his ability to unify diverse cultures under one banner. With Babylon's internal divisions growing, the stage was set for Cyrus's final move, the military campaign that would bring the mighty city to its knees. In 539 BCE, after months of diplomatic maneuvering and gaining support from Babylon's internal factions, Cyrus the Great was ready to move forward with his campaign to conquer the mighty city of Babylon. But unlike the traditional sieges that involved battering down walls and heavy combat, Cyrus's strategy was unique and, in many ways, a masterclass in warfare. Cyrus knew that a direct assault on the city's formidable walls would be a lengthy and costly endeavor. Babylon was not only protected by strong defenses, but its position on the Euphrates River gave it an added layer of protection. The river ran through the heart of the city, and its massive gates were built to withstand attacks, making it nearly impossible for invaders to break through. But Cyrus, as always, had a plan that would turn the tide in his favor. Rather than launching a traditional siege, Cyrus made a bold and innovative decision to divert the flow of the Euphrates River itself. By cutting off the river's path through the city, he would lower the water level enough to allow his troops to march directly into Babylon through the riverbed. This brilliant tactic would take Babylon's defenders by surprise and render the city's defenses ineffective. For months, Cyrus worked on a plan to divert the Euphrates. He sent engineers and laborers to dig canals and channels that would redirect the river's course. His forces worked diligently to ensure that the diverted water would be enough to lower the river level significantly. The task was challenging, but Cyrus was determined. He understood the significance of controlling the river, not just militarily, but symbolically. The Euphrates was the lifeblood of Babylon, and its manipulation would mark the beginning of the end for the city's defenses. As Cyrus's forces continued their work, the Babylonians, under King Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar, remained unaware of the impending danger. They believed the city's defenses were impenetrable and trusted in the might of the river to protect them. Little did they know that the river, their greatest ally, would soon become their greatest vulnerability. Finally, in the dead of night, the Euphrates River was successfully diverted. The water level lowered enough for Cyrus's army to march directly into Babylon through the riverbed, bypassing the city's grand walls. As Cyrus's troops entered the city unopposed, the Babylonian defenders were caught completely off guard. The surprise attack left them in disarray, and Babylon's once proud defenses crumbled almost instantly. But it wasn't just the military advantage that Cyrus had gained through his innovative tactics. It was also the internal divisions in Babylon that played to his advantage. As the Persians entered the city, the Babylonian people, who had grown weary of Nabonidus's rule, welcomed the invaders. Cyrus, in keeping with his policy of tolerance, promised that he would restore the worship of Marduk, the Babylonian god, and bring stability to the region. His message resonated with the priests and common people alike, who saw Cyrus not as a foreign invader, but as a liberator. Inside the city, chaos erupted as Babylon's military leaders realized their once great empire was being taken from within. Nabonidus, the king, had already fled the city, leaving his son, Belshazzar, to face the oncoming Persian forces. Belshazzar's inability to lead effectively compounded the city's problems, and within hours, Babylon fell into Cyrus's hands. The Battle of Babylon was, in many ways, a bloodless victory. Unlike many of the brutal sieges and bloody battles of the ancient world, the fall of Babylon was achieved through a combination of brilliant strategy, diplomacy, and the weakening of the city's internal unity. The people of Babylon, who had been under the oppressive rule of Nabonidus, saw Cyrus's arrival as a welcome change. The fall of Babylon marked the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the beginning of a new era under Persian rule. With the Persians marching triumphantly into the heart of Babylon, Cyrus's forces had effectively claimed the city. However, the fall of Babylon wasn't simply a military victory. It marked the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the beginning of a new chapter for the region. Yet, one final obstacle remained: King Nabonidus, who had fled the city. Nabonidus's departure from Babylon had been a strategic move in a time of crisis. He had left his son, Belshazzar, to defend the city, hoping to gain time to rally support from the surrounding regions. However, his absence had inadvertently undermined his authority and the confidence of the Babylonian people. His unpopular religious reforms, including his focus on the worship of the moon god Sinover Marduk, had already alienated much of the populace and the priesthood, who had always held great sway in Babylonian society. Upon entering the city, Cyrus made a critical decision that would further solidify his reputation as a ruler who was merciful and just. Unlike many conquerors who would have sought to destroy or humiliate their defeated enemies, Cyrus had no intention of executing Nabonidus. In fact, Cyrus allowed the former king to live, choosing to treat him with respect, a decision that would contribute to his growing reputation as a ruler who valued diplomacy and peace over destruction. Instead of slaughtering Nabonidus or treating him as an enemy, Cyrus placed him under guard but allowed him to live in relative comfort. Historical accounts vary on the exact details, but it's widely believed that Nabonidus was either brought to the Persian court or placed under house arrest in a distant region, where he was given some measure of respect and dignity. By sparing the life of the king, Cyrus demonstrated his intention to integrate Babylon into his growing empire, not through brutal subjugation, but through peaceful consolidation. Belshazzar, however, was not so fortunate. As the son of Nabonidus and the ruler left behind to defend Babylon, he was viewed with suspicion by the Babylonians themselves. His inability to defend the city, coupled with his father's unpopularity, led to his swift downfall. Historical accounts suggest that Belshazzar was captured and likely executed shortly after the fall of the city. His inability to maintain control over Babylon's military and his failure to unite the city's defenders contributed to his tragic fate. The fall of Nabonidus and Belshazzar marked the complete collapse of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Cyrus's methodical and strategic conquest had been crowned with success. Not only had he captured the city with minimal bloodshed, But he had also won the loyalty of the people through his promises of religious tolerance and respect for Babylonian culture. By sparing Nabonidus and allowing him to live, Cyrus ensured that Babylon would become a crucial part of the Persian Empire rather than a broken, bitter remnant of a conquered kingdom. This victory also symbolized the growing might of the Persian Empire. Babylon, one of the ancient world's most powerful and wealthy cities, had fallen not by sheer force of arms, but through a combination of diplomacy, strategy, and internal weakness. Cyrus's ability to both conquer and integrate diverse peoples would become one of the defining characteristics of his rule. After the fall of Babylon and the capture of Nabonidus, Cyrus the Great's next move was to secure his new empire. While military victory was vital, Cyrus understood that lasting success lay in governance and how he treated the diverse peoples and cultures he had conquered. His policies of tolerance, especially toward the people of Babylon, would go on to define his legacy and set him apart from many other conquerors of his time. One of the most significant symbols of Cyrus's inclusive rule is the Cyrus cylinder, a clay cylinder inscribed with a declaration of Cyrus's policies and actions following his conquest of Babylon. The cylinder is often considered the first charter of human rights, as it emphasizes religious tolerance, respect for local customs, and the liberation of oppressed peoples. In the cylinder, Cyrus states that he was divinely chosen to restore the rightful worship of Marduk, the Babylonian god, and that he was acting to liberate the people of Babylon from the harsh rule of Nabonidus. He presents himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, a ruler who respected the customs, gods, and ways of life of the people he governed. The Cyrus cylinder's declaration was particularly important because it demonstrated Cyrus's understanding of the power of religion and local customs in maintaining peace and order within his newly acquired empire. By reinstating Marduk's worship and offering to return sacred artifacts that Nabonidus had removed from their temples, Cyrus sought to win the favor of the Babylonian people. This was a stark contrast to the approach taken by many conquerors of the time, who often sought to impose their own culture and religion on their newly conquered territories. In addition to his religious policies, Cyrus's governance was focused on the principles of justice and fairness. According to the cylinder, Cyrus allowed the people of Babylon, as well as those in other parts of his empire, to retain their local customs, laws, and religious practices. He did not seek to impose Persian culture on the diverse peoples of his empire, but instead allowed each group to flourish in their own way, as long as they recognized his authority. This approach was not only wise but pragmatic. By treating the conquered peoples with respect, Cyrus was able to prevent rebellion and foster a sense of unity within his vast empire. People were more likely to accept Persian rule when they felt their traditions and beliefs were valued. Cyrus's reign became a model for future leaders on how to manage a diverse empire. His policies ensured that the Persian Empire, although vast and multifaceted, remained cohesive and stable for generations to come. Cyrus's treatment of the Jews is another key aspect of his legacy that is highlighted in the cylinder. After conquering Babylon, Cyrus issued a decree that allowed the Jews, who had been exiled in Babylon for several decades, to return to their homeland in Judea. Not only did Cyrus allow the Jews to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, but he also provided resources for its reconstruction. This act of kindness and religious tolerance toward the Jewish people is recorded in the Hebrew Bible and is seen as one of the most remarkable aspects of his rule. By establishing policies that promoted tolerance, respect for local cultures, and religious freedom, Cyrus the Great created an empire that was able to unite a diverse range of peoples. His approach to governance allowed the Persian Empire to thrive and endure for centuries, long after his death. The fall of Babylon in 539 BCE marked a defining moment in world history. Not only had Cyrus the Great successfully conquered one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world, but he had also laid the foundation for one of the largest and most enduring empires in history, the Persian Empire. As the dust settled, the policies and actions Cyrus implemented in the wake of Babylon's fall would shape the future of the empire and his enduring legacy. Cyrus's treatment of Babylon's inhabitants after the conquest was a reflection of his overall vision for his empire, one based on tolerance, respect for local customs, and cultural integration. His decision to spare the lives of the Babylonian people and their leaders particularly King Nabonidus, allowed the region to avoid the widespread destruction that often accompanied ancient sieges. Instead of eradicating the Babylonian elite, Cyrus integrated them into his administration, ensuring stability and loyalty within the newly expanded empire. One of the most remarkable aspects of the conquest was Cyrus's ability to gain the support of the Babylonian population. The promises he made to restore the worship of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, were not just symbolic acts. They were part of a larger strategy of ensuring that the conquered people felt respected and valued. By allowing the Babylonians to continue their religious practices and even supporting the reconstruction of their temples, Cyrus built a sense of goodwill that helped to pacify the city and integrate it into his empire without unnecessary bloodshed or unrest. Beyond Babylon, Cyrus's policies of tolerance were extended throughout the vast Persian Empire, which stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. The diverse cultures and religions of his empire were allowed to thrive under Persian rule, which became a model of governance for future empires. His approach to empire building, marked by respect for local customs and the inclusion of diverse peoples, set him apart from many of his contemporaries who sought to impose their will. In the years following the conquest of Babylon, Cyrus continued to expand his empire, though it was the way he ruled rather than the lands he conquered that became his lasting legacy. The Achaemenid Empire, which he founded, became a beacon of governance for centuries. His successors, particularly his son Cambyses II and grandson Darius I, would build upon the foundation Cyrus laid, expanding the empire even further and strengthening its administrative structure. Cyrus's legacy is also preserved in the Cyrus Cylinder, which not only highlights his policies in Babylon, but serves as a testament to his ideals of just and tolerant rule. The Cylinder is often considered the first declaration of human rights, as it emphasizes the rights of individuals to practice their religion and live according to their customs without fear of oppression. This document was a direct reflection of Cyrus's philosophy, which stressed the importance of freedom, justice, and respect for all people, regardless of their background. Cyrus's rule also had a lasting impact on the people of the ancient Near East. His conquest of Babylon and the establishment of the Persian Empire marked the end of the Babylonian dominance in the region, but it also brought about a period of relative peace and prosperity. The Silk Road, which began to flourish under the Persian Empire, helped to facilitate cultural exchanges between the East and West, leading to a flourishing of art, science, and trade that would last for centuries. In the centuries that followed, Cyrus was remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a visionary ruler who created an empire built on principles of justice, fairness, and respect for diversity. His policies of tolerance set the stage for the rise of a multi-ethnic empire that would outlast him and influence the development of other great empires in history, including the Roman Empire. Cyrus's death in 530 BCE marked the end of his reign, but the empire he created would continue to thrive under the leadership of his successors. His achievements were celebrated across the ancient world, and his name was immortalized as one of the greatest rulers in history. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus's vision, would last for over 2 centuries, cementing his place in the annals of world history as the man who bridged East and West, creating an empire where different cultures, religions, and peoples could coexist and prosper. Following his conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great was faced with the monumental task of governing a vast empire that stretched from the Indus River in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west. The Persian Empire was not a homogeneous territory. It encompassed a wide array of peoples, languages, cultures, and religions. However, it was Cyrus's policies of tolerance and respect for diversity that allowed this empire to flourish and become one of the most enduring empires in history. Cyrus understood that to maintain control over such a vast and culturally diverse empire, he needed to govern not through oppression, but through inclusion. Unlike many conquerors who imposed their own culture and religious beliefs on their subjects, Cyrus sought to integrate the peoples of his empire while allowing them to retain their unique identities. This approach was revolutionary for its time, and it helped to establish a model of governance that would be emulated by future empires. One of the key elements of Cyrus's policy of tolerance was his respect for local religions. Throughout his conquests, he made a point of allowing the peoples he defeated to continue practicing their own religions without interference. For example, in Babylon, after his conquest, Cyrus restored the worship of Marduk, the chief Babylonian god, and allowed the Babylonians to rebuild their temples. This act of religious tolerance helped to pacify the conquered people, who saw Cyrus not as a foreign invader, but as a ruler who respected their traditions. In addition to religious tolerance, Cyrus's policy extended to the recognition of local customs and laws. He allowed the various peoples within his empire to maintain their own legal systems and administrative practices, as long as they did not conflict with the broader interests of the empire. This not only fostered goodwill among the people, but also made it easier to govern a diverse empire. By allowing local leaders to retain power and manage their own affairs, Cyrus was able to prevent uprisings and rebellions that might have arisen had he imposed a rigid, centralized system. Another significant aspect of Cyrus's governance was his treatment of conquered elites. Rather than executing or exiling the leaders of the cities he conquered, he often integrated them into his administration. He recognized the value of local knowledge and leadership, and by co-opting the elite classes of conquered regions, he ensured that his rule was seen as legitimate by the people. This strategy not only helped maintain stability, but also prevented the formation of powerful opposition groups that could have destabilized the empire. Cyrus's tolerance was not just limited to the conquered peoples of Mesopotamia. It extended to the peoples of Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the Indus Valley as well. By respecting the customs and traditions of the various cultures under his rule, Cyrus established a diverse empire where different peoples coexisted relatively peacefully. His policies of inclusion laid the groundwork for the expansion of the Persian Empire under his successors, who would continue his legacy of tolerance. As a result of these policies, the Persian Empire became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions. It was a place where diverse peoples could live side by side, contributing to the rich cultural fabric of the empire. This unity and diversity became one of the defining features of the Persian Empire, and it played a key role in its longevity and success. One of the hallmarks of Cyrus's leadership was his ability to balance central control with local autonomy. In a vast empire like Persia, where different regions had their own customs, languages, and laws, it was essential for the central government to establish a system that respected local governance while maintaining overarching authority. This delicate balance allowed the empire to remain unified without alienating the diverse peoples within it. Cyrus's approach to governance was pragmatic and adaptable. Rather than imposing a rigid, one-size-fits-all structure, he allowed local leaders to retain a significant degree of power. Many of the conquered regions continued to be governed by their own elites, who were incorporated into the Persian administrative system. This strategy ensured that local populations felt their cultural identities were respected and preserved, even as they were brought under the rule of Persia. For example, in the territories of Media, Lydia, and Babylon, where Cyrus had previously conquered kings and rulers, he did not simply replace the native elites with Persians. Instead, he often made alliances with local rulers, granting them positions of authority within the empire. This allowed the local nobility to maintain a degree of influence while serving the interests of the Persian king. By incorporating these leaders into his administration, Cyrus ensured that they had a vested interest in maintaining stability and peace within the empire. The system of governance that Cyrus established was highly decentralized. While the Persian king held ultimate authority, local leaders, known as satraps, were given the responsibility of governing the individual regions. These satraps were often native to the regions they governed, ensuring that local customs and traditions were taken into account when administering justice and law. In return, the satraps were required to pay tribute to the central government, provide soldiers for the Persian army, and maintain order within their territories. The satrapal system not only helped ensure stability across the vast empire, but it also fostered a sense of loyalty to the Persian king. By granting local rulers a measure of autonomy, Cyrus was able to prevent widespread unrest and rebellion. The satraps were motivated to protect their territories and their power, as long as they adhered to the broader policies of the Persian king. This decentralized system, which allowed for regional autonomy within a unified empire, would be adopted and refined by Cyrus's successors, such as Darius I, and would remain a defining feature of the Persian Empire for centuries. This policy of local governance also promoted economic prosperity. Since the satraps were tasked with managing their region's economies, they had the incentive to foster trade, agriculture, and commerce. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus's leadership, became a melting pot of cultures and economies, with goods, ideas, and innovations flowing freely between regions. The wealth generated through trade and tribute was vital to the stability of the empire, and Cyrus's tolerance and respect for local customs ensured that this wealth continued to flow into the Persian coffers. Moreover, the satraps acted as protectors of the Persian Empire's borders, helping to maintain peace with neighboring civilizations. By maintaining local control over their territories, the satraps could more effectively respond to external threats, whether from nomadic tribes, rival empires, or internal revolts. The decentralized nature of the empire allowed Cyrus's forces to quickly mobilize and respond to conflicts without overextending the reach of the central government. Cyrus's recognition of the importance of local governance and autonomy played a crucial role in the longevity and stability of the Persian Empire. His ability to respect the customs, leadership, and traditions of the various peoples within his empire not only ensured their loyalty, but also created an environment where different cultures could coexist and thrive under the banner of Persian rule. Religion played an integral role in the governance of the Persian Empire, and Cyrus the Great's policies in this regard were a cornerstone of his broader approach to ruling a diverse empire. As Cyrus expanded his realm, he encountered a wide variety of religious beliefs and practices. From the polytheistic Babylonians to the monotheistic Jews, from the worshippers of Marduk in Babylon to the followers of Zoroastrianism in Persia, the empire was home to many different religions. Rather than seeking to impose one uniform belief system, Cyrus recognized the value in fostering religious tolerance and respecting the faiths of his subjects. Cyrus's approach to religion was rooted in his understanding that religious cohesion was often the key to maintaining political stability. He knew that attempting to suppress the religious practices of conquered peoples could lead to unrest and rebellion. So instead, he took a diplomatic approach that sought to respect and protect the religious practices of all his subjects. His policies would later influence future rulers of the Persian Empire and set a precedent for religious tolerance and governance. One of the most famous examples of Cyrus's religious tolerance is his treatment of the Jews, whom he freed from exile in Babylon. For over 50 years, the Jewish people had been living under Babylonian rule, having been exiled from their homeland after the conquest of Judea by the Babylonians. When Cyrus took control of Babylon, he issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to their land and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. This act of religious tolerance is seen as one of Cyrus's most significant achievements and is recorded in the Hebrew Bible, where he is described as a Messiah or anointed one sent by God to liberate the Jews. Cyrus's support of the Jews went beyond just allowing them to return to their land. He also provided them with resources to rebuild the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. The rebuilding of the temple was not only a religious act, but also a political one, as it helped to solidify Cyrus's control over Judea by gaining the support of the Jewish people. In his decree, Cyrus made it clear that he was restoring the religious freedoms of the Jews, acknowledging their right to worship as they pleased, and providing the necessary support to rebuild their sacred site. This act of religious tolerance had far-reaching consequences, not just for the Jews, but for the broader population of the Persian Empire. Cyrus's policies demonstrated that he was not a conqueror interested in wiping out or replacing the cultures and beliefs of the people he ruled. Instead, he promoted coexistence, making the Persian Empire a haven for religious diversity. Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance also extended to the Babylonians. As mentioned earlier, after the conquest of Babylon, Cyrus restored the worship of Marduk, the Babylonian god, and allowed the Babylonians to maintain their religious practices. He not only returned the idols of Marduk, but also promised to protect the temples of all the gods. In doing so, he sought to calm any unrest that might have arisen from the Babylonians' fear of their religious practices being suppressed under Persian rule. Moreover, Cyrus's empire encompassed regions where other religious practices, such as those of the Zoroastrians in Persia, were important. As a Zoroastrian himself, Cyrus was a follower of one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, and he respected the beliefs of others, even as he continued to practice his own faith. His tolerance allowed for religious diversity, and people from different faith traditions could live and worship freely in his empire. Cyrus's policies towards religion were more than just a matter of political expediency. They were grounded in his deep respect for the spiritual lives of the people he ruled. His ability to navigate the complex religious landscape of his empire, while promoting unity, helped ensure the stability and prosperity of the Persian Empire. By allowing religious freedom and protecting the rights of religious communities, Cyrus created a society where people could coexist peacefully despite their differences. This policy of religious tolerance set Cyrus apart from many of his contemporaries and became a defining characteristic of his rule. His reign laid the foundation for a more inclusive and pluralistic society that would influence subsequent Persian rulers, as well as other empires in history. As the founder of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great understood that in order for his vast and diverse realm to thrive, it was not enough to simply conquer and rule. To maintain peace and stability over such a large area, he needed to implement efficient administrative reforms. His success as a ruler was not just due to his military conquests, but also his vision for governance, an inclusive, decentralized system that empowered local leaders while ensuring that central authority was maintained. One of Cyrus's most notable reforms was the establishment of the satrapy system, a form of regional governance that divided his empire into provinces, each known as a satrapy. Each satrapy was governed by a satrap, or provincial governor, who was typically chosen from among the local elite. The satrap was responsible for overseeing the administration, collecting taxes, maintaining local order, and raising military forces when needed. This system allowed for the integration of local customs and leadership into the Persian structure, ensuring that the native peoples were able to retain some measure of autonomy while still being loyal to the Persian king. The satraps were appointed directly by Cyrus, and they were expected to report to the central government in Persepolis. However, while Cyrus maintained ultimate authority over the empire, he trusted his satraps with significant power, making them responsible for the daily governance of their regions. This decentralized approach to governance enabled Cyrus to rule over vast territories with relative ease, as it allowed for flexibility in dealing with different regions and cultures. Cyrus also ensured that each satrap was held accountable. He implemented a system of royal inspectors, known as the eyes and ears of the king, who were sent throughout the empire to ensure that the satraps were fulfilling their duties and not abusing their power. This system of checks and balances helped prevent corruption and ensured that the Persian Empire remained stable and efficient. The system of governance Cyrus established became a model for later empires, including the Achaemenid Empire's successors, the Seleucid and Sasanian empires. It also influenced other great empires, such as the Roman Empire, which adopted similar provincial governance systems. The idea of decentralizing power while maintaining central control was a revolutionary concept at the time and played a key role in the long-lasting success of the Persian Empire. Additionally, Cyrus's policies were focused on economic stability. The Persian Empire, under his rule, became a hub of trade and commerce. Cyrus implemented policies that promoted trade, particularly along the famous Silk Road, which connected the East and West. His empire facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture, benefiting from the diverse regions it encompassed. Cyrus understood that economic prosperity was essential for the well-being of his empire, and he encouraged the development of infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and cities to facilitate trade and communication. Cyrus also promoted a system of standardized coinage, which helped to create a more unified economy across the empire. The introduction of a common currency made trade easier and more efficient, allowing merchants and traders to conduct business without the need for bartering or exchanging goods. This system of standardized coinage, along with the use of a common language, Old Persian, for official business, helped bind the empire together and made it easier for Cyrus to control his vast domain. One of the most enduring legacies of Cyrus's rule was his commitment to justice. He is often remembered for his fairness and his belief in the rule of law. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, which outlines his policies after the conquest of Babylon, is considered one of the earliest declarations of human rights. It stresses the importance of justice, religious freedom, and respect for all peoples. It is said that Cyrus allowed for the resettlement of displaced peoples, including the Jews, who had been exiled by the Babylonians. He respected the customs and laws of the peoples he ruled, ensuring that justice was applied fairly, regardless of race or religion. Cyrus's administrative reforms and policies of governance helped lay the foundation for the Persian Empire to not only survive but thrive for centuries after his death. His legacy as a just and tolerant ruler who promoted good governance, economic prosperity, and social harmony left a lasting mark on history. His approach to ruling a diverse empire would go on to influence future empires, and his system of administration became a model for effective governance in the ancient world. One of the critical factors behind the success and longevity of the Persian Empire was its military. While Cyrus the Great's policies of tolerance, inclusion, and good governance created a strong foundation for the empire, it was the strength and discipline of the Persian military that allowed it to maintain control over its vast and diverse territories. The Persian army was not just a force of conquest. It was a well-organized and strategically innovative military machine that played a central role in the empire's expansion and stability. Cyrus the Great, as a military leader, understood that in order to build and sustain an empire, the army needed to be both formidable and flexible. He recognized the value of combining traditional military tactics with new ideas and innovations, which enabled him to overcome larger and more established armies. Cyrus's army was not only composed of Persian soldiers, but also included troops from the various regions he had conquered, making it a truly multinational force. This diverse composition was a reflection of the empire's broader philosophy of inclusion and tolerance. One of the key features of the Persian military was its elite cavalry, particularly the Immortals, a highly trained force of 10,000 soldiers who were known for their exceptional skills in battle. The Immortals were called so because their ranks were always filled. When a soldier fell, he was immediately replaced, ensuring that the unit remained at full strength at all times. The Immortals were heavily armed and trained for rapid, decisive strikes, and they played a central role in many of Cyrus's victories. Their skill and discipline in battle earned them a reputation that struck fear into their enemies. In addition to the Immortals, Cyrus's army also relied heavily on chariots, which were used for both combat and transportation. Persian chariots were equipped with scythes attached to their wheels, allowing them to mow down enemy troops with devastating effect. These chariots, combined with the speed and agility of the cavalry, allowed the Persian army to move swiftly across the battlefield and strike unexpectedly. Cyrus also understood the importance of siege warfare, a crucial skill for any empire that aimed to expand its territory. The Persian army, under Cyrus, developed advanced techniques for laying siege to fortified cities. This included the use of battering rams, siege towers, and the ability to cut off water supplies and starve cities into submission. These tactics enabled Cyrus to conquer some of the most heavily fortified cities of the ancient world, including the great city of Babylon. Another innovation introduced by Cyrus was the use of intelligence and espionage. Cyrus was a shrewd strategist who understood that knowledge of enemy movements and plans was just as important as the strength of his own forces. His spies infiltrated enemy camps, gathering valuable information that gave him the upper hand in many battles. The Persian military's use of intelligence helped them to avoid unnecessary battles and to launch surprise attacks when the enemy was most vulnerable. Cyrus's military was also highly disciplined, and this discipline extended not only to the soldiers but also to the commanders. Persian commanders were expected to lead by example, showing courage and decisiveness on the battlefield. The Persian army was organized into units, each with a specific role to play, and soldiers were trained to work together as a cohesive force. This sense of unity and coordination was critical in allowing the Persians to defeat larger and more experienced armies. The Persian army's success was not only a result of military prowess, but also of the loyalty and motivation of its soldiers. Cyrus treated his army with respect, ensuring that soldiers were well-fed, well-equipped, and well-paid. This sense of mutual respect between the king and his soldiers helped foster a strong sense of loyalty to Cyrus, which was crucial in maintaining the empire's stability. Cyrus's treatment of his troops, his emphasis on fairness, and his understanding of the importance of morale contributed significantly to the Persian military's success. Cyrus's military reforms, along with his ability to inspire loyalty among his troops, created an army that was capable of expanding the Persian Empire across a vast and diverse region. His army conquered territory from the Indus Valley in the east to Asia Minor in the west, and it was the backbone of the Persian Empire's rapid rise to power. The Persian military, under Cyrus's leadership, became one of the most formidable forces in the ancient world, and it played a central role in the creation and maintenance of the empire he built. One of the most distinctive features of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great was its ability to integrate a wide range of peoples, cultures, and customs into a cohesive, functioning empire. Unlike many empires of the ancient world, which sought to impose their own culture and way of life on conquered peoples, Cyrus embraced the diversity within his empire. His policy of cultural integration not only helped to stabilize his empire, but also fostered an environment where the arts, sciences, and cultures from various regions could flourish. Cyrus understood that the strength of his empire lay in its diversity. He made no attempt to erase the identities of the peoples he conquered, but instead allowed them to retain their local customs, languages, and religious practices. By respecting the cultural identities of these groups, Cyrus was able to create an atmosphere of cooperation, rather than resentment, among his subjects. This inclusivity helped to secure loyalty and prevent rebellions, which were common in other empires that tried to enforce cultural homogeneity. In Babylon, for example, Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance was particularly significant. After his conquest of Babylon, he not only allowed the Babylonians to continue worshiping their gods, but also supported the rebuilding of their temples. This action was crucial in winning the favor of the Babylonians, who had been oppressed by the religious reforms of King Nabonidus, who had promoted the worship of the moon god Sin over Marduk, the chief Babylonian god. By restoring Marduk's worship and providing resources to rebuild temples, Cyrus won the loyalty of the Babylonian priesthood and the general population. Similarly, Cyrus allowed the Jewish people, who had been exiled to Babylon, to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. This act of cultural and religious restoration was not only an act of kindness, but also a pragmatic political move, ensuring the loyalty of the Jewish population and securing a crucial region within the empire. The Jews, in return, held Cyrus in high regard, seeing him as a liberator and a righteous ruler. Beyond religious tolerance, Cyrus's empire also became a melting pot for different artistic and intellectual traditions. The Persian Empire, with its vast expanse, encompassed a range of cultures, from the highly advanced civilizations of Mesopotamia to the nomadic tribes of Central Asia. Under Cyrus, these cultures did not simply coexist. They interacted and influenced one another, creating a rich cultural exchange that would continue throughout the history of the empire. The Persian Empire became a hub of trade, where goods, ideas, and innovations flowed freely between East and West. The Silk Road, which connected China to the Mediterranean, passed through Persian territories, allowing for the exchange of silk, spices, and other valuable commodities. This trade also facilitated the exchange of ideas in art, science, and philosophy. Persian rulers, including Cyrus's successors, continued to promote the flow of knowledge and culture, making the empire one of the most cosmopolitan in the ancient world. In addition to fostering cultural exchange, Cyrus also encouraged advancements in art, architecture, and technology. The Persians adopted and adapted techniques from the civilizations they conquered, including the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Greeks. The result was a unique fusion of architectural styles, seen in the grand palaces and cities built under Persian rule, such as Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire. Persepolis became a symbol of the Persian Empire's grandeur, with its impressive architecture, intricate carvings, and monumental staircases, all reflecting the diverse cultural influences that came together under Cyrus's reign. Cyrus's vision of a multicultural empire helped create a society where intellectual and artistic achievements were celebrated, and people from different backgrounds could contribute to the empire's success. His policies laid the groundwork for a cultural renaissance that would continue throughout the Achaemenid dynasty, culminating in the reign of Darius I and Xerxes I, when the Persian Empire reached its greatest extent. In the long run, the integration of conquered peoples and the flourishing of cultural exchange under Cyrus's reign had lasting effects on the development of the ancient world. The Persian Empire, which was built on the foundation of tolerance and cultural respect, provided a model for later empires, such as the Roman Empire, which would also integrate various cultures into their governance. Moreover, Cyrus's legacy of religious and cultural tolerance would continue to inspire leaders in future generations, cementing his place as one of the Cyrus the Great's reign, though relatively short, laid the foundations for one of the most impressive and enduring empires in history. His policies of tolerance, respect for local customs, and pragmatic governance ensured that his empire flourished. However, even a ruler as brilliant as Cyrus could not escape the inevitable forces of time. His death in 530 BCE marked the end of an era for the Persian Empire, but his legacy lived on through the structures he had created and the empire he built. Cyrus's death occurred during a military campaign in the northeast, possibly against the Massagetæ, a nomadic tribe from the Central Asian steppes. According to historical sources, including Herodotus, Cyrus met his end in battle against their queen, Thamyris, who avenged the death of her son by defeating the Persian army. While the circumstances of his death remain somewhat unclear, it is certain that his passing left a void in the leadership of the empire. The Persian Empire, now without its visionary founder, faced the challenge of maintaining unity and stability. Cyrus had been a unifying force, holding together a vast and diverse empire through his policies of inclusion and tolerance. With his death, the question arose whether his successors would be able to continue his legacy or whether the empire would fracture under the weight of its own size and complexity. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, succeeded him as the ruler of the Persian Empire. While Cambyses was an ambitious and capable military leader, his reign was marked by some of the excesses and flaws that often accompany succession after a great ruler. Cambyses's conquests included the invasion of Egypt, where he successfully overthrew the pharaoh and added Egypt to the Persian Empire. However, his reign also saw the decline in the tolerant and inclusive policies that had defined Cyrus's rule. Cambyses was seen by some as a more ruthless ruler, and his reign was marred by instability and internal rebellion. Despite these challenges, the Persian Empire endured. The dynasty that Cyrus founded would continue for nearly 2 centuries, with leaders like Darius I and Xerxes I building upon the structures and policies he had put in place. Darius, in particular, is often credited with consolidating and expanding the empire, creating a system of government that would allow the Persian Empire to function as a cohesive unit. He introduced reforms in administration, including the creation of a system of satrapies, and promoted the use of a standardized currency to facilitate trade across the empire. Cyrus's empire, though imperfect, would go on to influence many later civilizations. The model of a multi-ethnic, multicultural empire that promoted tolerance and respect for local customs served as a foundation for future empires, including the Macedonian Empire of Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire. Cyrus's ability to integrate diverse peoples and maintain relative peace and prosperity across his vast empire set a standard for governance that was emulated by future rulers. The enduring nature of Cyrus's empire also had an intellectual legacy. The Cyrus Cylinder, which outlined his policies of religious tolerance and respect for conquered peoples, became a symbol of enlightened leadership. The cylinder is often cited as one of the first declarations of human rights, emphasizing the importance of justice, freedom, and respect for different cultures and religions. Its principles would influence thinkers and rulers in the centuries to come. Cyrus's name, too, lived on as a symbol of just and wise leadership. His reputation as a fair ruler, who treated the peoples he conquered with dignity, helped solidify his status as one of the greatest leaders in history. For centuries, his image was held up as an example of how a ruler could create an empire that was both vast and harmonious, built on principles of tolerance, fairness, and respect for diversity. In the end, Cyrus's legacy was not just the empire he created, but the enduring principles of governance that he introduced. His vision of an empire where different peoples could coexist peacefully, where cultural and religious diversity were celebrated, set a precedent that would influence the course of history long after his death. The Persian Empire he founded continued to thrive for centuries, becoming one of the most influential and enduring empires the world had ever seen. By 530 BCE, Cyrus the Great had accomplished what few could even dream of. He had united the disparate tribes and kingdoms of the ancient Near East into a single, powerful empire. The Persian Empire stretched from the Indus River in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, and from the mountains of the Caucasus to the sands of Egypt. But while his empire was vast and prosperous, Cyrus's work was far from complete. His final campaign would take him into the heart of Central Asia, where the nomadic and fierce Massagetæ, led by their queen Thamyris, awaited him. The Massagetæ were a powerful nomadic tribe, known for their horsemanship and warrior culture. They live in the vast steppes of Central Asia, east of the Caspian Sea, and had long been a formidable force in the region. Their queen, Thamyris, was a feared and respected leader who had recently taken control of the tribe following the death of her husband. Thamyris' power and her people's fighting prowess made her a potential threat to Cyrus's eastern frontier, and he decided to lead a campaign to bring the Massagetæ under Persian control. The reasons for Cyrus's decision to invade the Massagetæ were both strategic and personal. The nomads were becoming increasingly bold in their raids against the eastern regions of his empire, and Cyrus likely saw an opportunity to expand Persia's borders even further. Additionally, rumors had spread that Thamyris had made advances toward the Persian Empire, seeking to expand her influence in the region. A decisive campaign against the Massagetæ could not only secure the empire's eastern borders, but also solidify Cyrus's status as a conqueror of great repute, ensuring that his empire would dominate for generations to come. Despite the risks involved, Cyrus was undeterred. He was known for his military genius and had never been one to shy away from battle. He must have seen in Thamyris and the Massagetæ an opportunity to further cement his legacy as the most powerful ruler of his time. However, the challenge of fighting a nomadic tribe was vastly different from the traditional wars Cyrus had fought in the past. The Massagetæ were skilled in guerrilla warfare, using their mobility and knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Cyrus gathered his army and set off toward the steppes, confident that his experience and strategies would be enough to defeat Thamyris' forces. However, the campaign was not to be as easy as he had anticipated. The Massagetæ, with their expert use of cavalry and archery, proved to be a difficult opponent. Thamyris, though a woman in a male-dominated world, was a formidable military leader, and her forces were well prepared for battle. As Cyrus advanced deeper into Massagetæ territory, the first skirmishes occurred along the borders. The Persian forces were met with fierce resistance, and the Massagetæ proved to be more organized and resilient than Cyrus had initially expected. Despite the early setbacks, the Persian army continued to push forward, and soon, the decisive battle between Cyrus and Thamyris would be at hand. Cyrus the Great's final campaign took him deep into the heart of the Massagetæ territory, where Queen Thamyris had gathered her forces to face the Persian army. The Massagetæ, a fierce and nomadic people, were known for their cavalry and ability to navigate the open steppes, making them formidable opponents for any invader. The challenge was immense. Cyrus was now facing an adversary unlike any he had encountered before, an enemy who was not only militarily skilled, but also deeply motivated by the desire to protect their homeland from foreign occupation. Cyrus, known for his strategic brilliance, initially attempted to engage in diplomacy before resorting to full-scale warfare. According to some historical accounts, he sent emissaries to Queen Thamyris, offering her peace and promising not to invade if she agreed to a truce. However, Thamyris, aware of Cyrus's reputation for conquest, refused his offer. She was determined to protect her people and her lands, and her refusal marked the beginning of a conflict that would culminate in the Battle of the Massagetæ. Realizing that negotiations had failed, Cyrus prepared for battle. He knew that a direct confrontation with the Massagetæ would not be easy. The nomads had no fixed cities to defend, but their mobility and ability to fight in the open steppes made them a dangerous opponent. The Persian army, though well organized, would need to adjust its tactics to counter the Massagetæ's guerrilla-style warfare. To this end, Cyrus devised a strategy that involved both heavy cavalry and infantry, with a focus on drawing the Massagetæ into an open battle where their mobility could be neutralized. The Massagetæ forces, led by Queen Tamaris, were equally prepared. Tamaris, a formidable leader who had already proven her mettle in battle, gathered her best warriors and divided them into smaller, mobile units that could strike quickly and retreat before the Persian army could respond. Tamaris' forces were light, on-foot soldiers, but relied heavily on their cavalry, archers, and chariots. She also had the advantage of knowing the terrain intimately, and her troops were accustomed to fighting in the open plains. The battle began on the open fields near the Massagetæ stronghold. Initially, the Persian army held the advantage with its larger and more heavily equipped forces. The Persian cavalry, which had been instrumental in past victories, launched a series of assaults on the Massagetæ's flanks. However, the Massagetæ's swift and mobile cavalry proved difficult to pin down. They used their superior knowledge of the land to outmaneuver the Persians, drawing Cyrus's forces into a series of ambushes and skirmishes. As the battle wore on, the true nature of the Massagetæ strategy began to emerge. Tamaris, recognizing that the Persian army was heavily dependent on its supply lines and heavy cavalry, baited them into a prolonged engagement. Her forces used their agility to wear down the Persians, attacking them from multiple directions and inflicting damage to their vulnerable supply chains. In a critical turning point, Tamaris reportedly lured Cyrus's forces into a trap. Some sources suggest that she used a feigned retreat to draw the Persian army deeper into Massagetæ territory, where they could be surrounded. The Persian cavalry, unaccustomed to such tactics, became disoriented and vulnerable. This moment proved to be the beginning of the end for Cyrus's forces. Though the Massagetæ were not yet victorious, the Persian army's morale began to falter. Cyrus, ever the tactician, attempted to regroup and push his forces forward, but the relentless nature of the Massagetæ's attacks began to take a toll. The battle, once seen as a clear opportunity for victory, was slipping away from Cyrus's grasp. As the battle against the Massagetæ raged on, the situation for Cyrus and his army grew increasingly dire. Despite his reputation for military genius, the Persian king faced a series of tactical challenges that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed empire he had built. Queen Tamaris, known for her fierce resolve, continued to outmaneuver Cyrus's forces, employing her nomadic army's unparalleled mobility to devastating effect. By 530 BCE, Cyrus the Great had accomplished what few could even dream of. He had united the disparate tribes and kingdoms of the ancient Near East into a single, powerful empire. The Persian Empire stretched from the Indus River in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, and from the mountains of the Caucasus to the sands of Egypt. But while his empire was vast and prosperous, Cyrus's work was far from complete. His final campaign would take him into the heart of Central Asia, where the nomadic and fierce Massagetæ, led by their queen Tamaris, awaited him. The Massagetæ were a powerful nomadic tribe, known for their horsemanship and warrior culture. They lived in the vast steppes of Central Asia, east of the Caspian Sea, and had long been a formidable force in the region. Their queen, Tamaris, was a feared and respected leader who had recently taken control of the tribe following the death of her husband. Tamaris' power and her people's fighting prowess made her a potential threat to Cyrus's eastern frontier, and he decided to lead a campaign to bring the Massagetæ under Persian control. The reasons for Cyrus's decision to invade the Massagetæ were both strategic and personal. The nomads were becoming increasingly bold in their raids against the eastern regions of his empire, and Cyrus likely saw an opportunity to expand Persia's borders even further. Additionally, rumors had spread that Tamaris had made advances toward the Persian Empire, seeking to expand her influence in the region. A decisive campaign against the Massagetæ could not only secure the empire's eastern borders, but also solidify Cyrus's status as a conqueror of great repute, ensuring that his empire would dominate for generations to come. Despite the risks involved, Cyrus was undeterred. He was known for his military genius and had never been one to shy away from battle. He must have seen in Tamaris and the Massagetæ an opportunity to further cement his legacy as the most powerful ruler of his time. However, the challenge of fighting a nomadic tribe was vastly different from the traditional war Cyrus had fought in the past. The Massagetæ were skilled in guerrilla warfare, using their mobility and knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Cyrus gathered his army and set off toward the steppes, confident that his experience and strategies would be enough to defeat Thamur's forces. However, the campaign was not to be as easy as he had anticipated. The Massagetæ, with their expert use of cavalry and archery, proved to be a difficult opponent. Thamurus, though a woman in a male-dominated world, was a formidable military leader, and her forces were well prepared for battle. As Cyrus advanced deeper into Massagetæ territory, the first skirmishes occurred along the borders. The Persian forces were met with fierce resistance, and the Massagetæ proved to be more organized and resilient than Cyrus had initially expected. Despite the early setbacks, the Persian army continued to push forward, and soon, the decisive battle between Cyrus and Thamurus would be at hand. Cyrus the Great's final campaign took him deep into the heart of the Massagetæ territory, where Queen Thamurus had gathered her forces to face the Persian army. The Massagetæ, a fierce and nomadic people, were known for their cavalry and ability to navigate the open steppes, making them formidable opponents for any invader. The challenge was immense. Cyrus was now facing an adversary unlike any he had encountered before, an enemy who was not only militarily skilled, but also deeply motivated by the desire to protect their homeland from foreign occupation. Cyrus, known for his strategic brilliance, initially attempted to engage in diplomacy before resorting to full-scale warfare. According to some historical accounts, he sent emissaries to Queen Thamurus, offering her peace and promising not to invade if she agreed to a truce. However, Thamurus, aware of Cyrus's reputation for conquest, refused his offer. She was determined to protect her people and her lands, and her refusal marked the beginning of a conflict that would culminate in the Battle of the Massagetæ. Realizing that negotiations had failed, Cyrus prepared for battle. He knew that a direct confrontation with the Massagetæ would not be easy. The nomads had no fixed cities to defend, but their mobility and ability to fight in the open steppes made them a dangerous opponent. The Persian army, though well-organized, would need to adjust its tactics to counter the Massagetæ's guerrilla-style warfare. To this end, Cyrus devised a strategy that involved both heavy cavalry and infantry, with a focus on drawing the Massagetæ into an open battle. The Massagetæ forces, led by Queen Thamurus, were equally prepared. Thamurus, a formidable leader who had already proven her mettle in battle, gathered her best warriors and divided them into smaller, mobile units that could strike quickly and retreat before the Persian army could respond. Thamurus' forces were light on foot soldiers, but relied heavily on their cavalry, archers, and chariots. She also had the advantage of knowing the terrain intimately, and her troops were accustomed to fighting in the open plains. The battle began on the open fields near the Massagetæ stronghold. Initially, the Persian army held the advantage with its larger and more heavily equipped forces. The Persian cavalry, which had been instrumental in past victories, launched a series of assaults on the Massagetæ's flanks. However, the Massagetæ's swift and mobile cavalry proved difficult to pin down. They used their superior knowledge of the land to outmaneuver the Persians, drawing Cyrus's forces into a series of ambushes and skirmishes. As the battle wore on, the true nature of the Massagetæ strategy began to emerge. Thamurus, recognizing that the Persian army was heavily dependent on its supply lines and heavy cavalry, baited them into a prolonged engagement. Her forces used their agility to wear down the Persians, attacking them from multiple directions and inflicting damage to their vulnerable supply chains. In a critical turning point, Thamurus reportedly lured Cyrus's forces into a trap. Some sources suggest that she used a feigned retreat to draw the Persian army deeper into Massagetæ territory, where they could be surrounded. The Persian cavalry, unaccustomed to such tactics, became disoriented and vulnerable. This moment proved to be the beginning of the end for Cyrus's forces. Though the Massagetæ were not yet victorious, the Persian army's morale began to falter. Cyrus, ever the tactician, attempted to regroup and push his forces forward, but the relentless nature of the Massagetæ's attacks began to take a toll. The battle, once seen as a clear opportunity for victory, was slipping away from Cyrus's grasp. As the battle against the Massagetæ raged on, the situation for Cyrus and his army grew increasingly dire. Despite his reputation for military genius, The Persian king faced a series of tactical challenges that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed empire he had built. Queen Tamaris, known for her fierce resolve, continued to outmaneuver Cyrus's forces, employing her nomadic army's unparalleled mobility to devastating effect. During the final stages of the battle, Cyrus attempted to break the deadlock by deploying his elite cavalry and the famed immortals. But this tactic proved ineffective against Tamaris' agile forces. The Massagetæ, expertly navigating the terrain, continued to wear down the Persian army. At the height of the battle, Cyrus, determined to secure victory, led a final charge, but this too was met with swift and brutal resistance. BY 530 BCE, Cyrus the Great had accomplished what few could even dream of. He had united the disparate tribes and kingdoms of the ancient Near East into a single, powerful empire. The Persian Empire stretched from the Indus River in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, and from the mountains of the Caucasus to the sands of Egypt. But while his empire was vast and prosperous, Cyrus's work was far from complete. His final campaign would take him into the heart of Central Asia, where the nomadic and fierce Massagetæ, led by their queen Tamaris, awaited him. The Massagetæ were a powerful nomadic tribe, known for their horsemanship and warrior culture. They lived in the vast steppes of Central Asia, east of the Caspian Sea, and had long been a formidable force in the region. Their queen, Tamaris, was a feared and respected leader who had recently taken control of the tribe following the death of her husband. Tamaris' power and her people's fighting prowess made her a potential threat to Cyrus's eastern frontier, and he decided to lead a campaign to bring the Massagetæ under Persian control. The reasons for Cyrus's decision to invade the Massagetæ were both strategic and personal. The nomads were becoming increasingly bold in their raids against the eastern regions of his empire, and Cyrus likely saw an opportunity to expand Persia's borders even further. Additionally, rumors had spread that Tamaris had made advances toward the Persian Empire, seeking to expand her influence in the region. A decisive campaign against the Massagetæ could not only secure the empire's eastern borders, but also solidify Cyrus's status as a conqueror of great repute, ensuring that his empire would dominate for generations to come. Despite the risks involved, Cyrus was undeterred. He was known for his military genius and had never been one to shy away from battle. He must have seen in Tamaris and the Massagetæ an opportunity to further cement his legacy as the most powerful ruler of his time. However, the challenge of fighting a nomadic tribe was vastly different from the traditional war Cyrus had fought in the past. The Massagetæ were skilled in guerrilla warfare, using their mobility and knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Cyrus gathered his army and set off toward the steppes, confident that his experience and strategies would be enough to defeat Tamaris' forces. However, the campaign was not to be as easy as he had anticipated. The Massagetæ, with their expert use of cavalry and archery, proved to be a difficult opponent. Tamaris, though a woman in a male-dominated world, was a formidable military leader, and her forces were well prepared for battle. As Cyrus advanced deeper into Massagetæ territory, the first skirmishes occurred along the borders. The Persian forces were met with fierce resistance, and the Massagetæ proved to be more organized and resilient than Cyrus had initially expected. Despite the early setbacks, the Persian army continued to push forward, and soon, the decisive battle between Cyrus and Tamaris would be at hand. Cyrus the Great's final campaign took him deep into the heart of the Massagetæ territory, where Queen Tamaris had gathered her forces to face the Persian army. The Massagetæ, a fierce and nomadic people, were known for their cavalry and ability to navigate the open steppes, making them formidable opponents for any invader. The challenge was immense. Cyrus was now facing an adversary unlike any he had encountered before, an enemy who was not only militarily skilled, but also deeply motivated by the desire to protect their homeland from foreign occupation. Cyrus, known for his strategic brilliance, initially attempted to engage in diplomacy before resorting to full-scale warfare. According to some historical accounts, he sent emissaries to Queen Tamaris, offering her peace and promising not to invade if she agreed to a truce. However, Tamaris, aware of Cyrus's reputation for conquest, refused his offer. She was determined to protect her people and her lands, and her refusal marked the beginning of a conflict that would culminate in the Battle of the Massagetæ. Realizing that negotiations had failed, Cyrus prepared for battle. He knew that a direct confrontation with the Massagetæ would not be easy. The nomads had no fixed cities to defend, but their mobility and ability to fight in the open steppes made them a dangerous opponent. The Persian army, though well organized, would need to adjust its tactics to counter the Massagetæ's guerrilla-style warfare. To this end, Cyrus devised a strategy that involved both heavy cavalry and infantry, with a focus on drawing the Massagetæ into an open battle where their mobility could be neutralized. The Massagetæ forces, led by Queen Tamaris, were equally prepared. Tamaris, a formidable leader who had already proven her mettle in battle, gathered her best warriors and divided them into smaller, mobile units that could strike quickly and retreat before the Persian army could respond. Tamaris' forces were light on foot soldiers, but relied heavily on their cavalry, archers, and chariots. She also had the advantage of knowing the terrain intimately, and her troops were accustomed to fighting in the open plains. The battle began on the open fields near the Massagetæ stronghold. Initially, the Persian army held the advantage with its larger and more heavily equipped forces. The Persian cavalry, which had been instrumental in past victories, launched a series of assaults on the Massagetæ's flanks. However, the Massagetæ's swift and mobile cavalry proved difficult to pin down. They used their superior knowledge of the land to outmaneuver the Persians, drawing Cyrus's forces into a series of ambushes and skirmishes. As the battle wore on, the true nature of the Massagetæ strategy began to emerge. Tamaris, recognizing that the Persian army was heavily dependent on its supply lines and heavy cavalry, baited them into a prolonged engagement. Her forces used their agility to wear down the Persians, attacking them from multiple directions and inflicting damage to their vulnerable supply chains. In a critical turning point, Tamaris reportedly lured Cyrus's forces into a trap. Some sources suggest that she used a feigned retreat to draw the Persian army deeper into Massagetæ territory, where they could be surrounded. The Persian cavalry, unaccustomed to such tactics, became disoriented and vulnerable. This moment proved to be the beginning of the end for Cyrus's forces. Though the Massagetæ were not yet victorious, the Persian army's morale began to falter. Cyrus, ever the tactician, attempted to regroup and push his forces forward, but the relentless nature of the Massagetæ's attacks began to take a toll. The battle, once seen as a clear opportunity for victory, was slipping away from Cyrus's grasp. As the battle against the Massagetæ raged on, the situation for Cyrus and his army grew increasingly dire. Despite his reputation for military genius, the Persian king faced a series of tactical challenges that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed empire he had built. Queen Tamaris, known for her fierce resolve, continued to outmaneuver Cyrus's forces, employing her nomadic army's unparalleled mobility to devastating effect. During the final stages of the battle, Cyrus attempted to break the deadlock by deploying his elite cavalry and the famed immortals, but this tactic proved ineffective against Tamaris' agile forces. The Massagetæ, expertly navigating the terrain, continued to wear down the Persian army. At the height of the battle, Cyrus, determined to secure victory, led a final charge, but this too was met with swift and brutal resistance. The sources surrounding Cyrus's death are shrouded in mystery, and several accounts present different versions of the events. The most widely accepted narrative comes from Herodotus, who recounts that in the chaos of battle, Cyrus was eventually struck down by the Massagetæ. Some say he was killed by an arrow, while others suggest that it was a close-quarters encounter with Tamaris herself that led to his death. Regardless of the exact circumstances, it is clear that Cyrus's death occurred at the hands of the Massagetæ after an intense and protracted engagement. Upon learning of Cyrus's death, Queen Tamaris reportedly vowed to avenge her fallen warriors and the destruction caused by the Persian invasion. According to historical accounts, she ordered the body of Cyrus to be retrieved from the battlefield, and in a final act of defiance, she allegedly decapitated the corpse. The story goes that Tamaris filled a wineskin with Cyrus's blood, symbolically drowning him in the very substance he had spilled in his conquest. This act, though exaggerated in some accounts, underscores the deep personal and cultural significance of Cyrus's death to the Massagetæ and their queen. The death of Cyrus was a devastating blow to the Persian army, which was already reeling from the Massagetes' superior tactics. His forces, without the leadership and strategy of their king, were thrown into disarray. While some Persian soldiers managed to escape, the battle ended in a rout for the once unbeatable Persian army. The Massagetes' victory over Cyrus marked the final, tragic chapter in the life of one of history's greatest conquerors. The loss of Cyrus had far-reaching consequences, both for the Persian army and for the empire he had so carefully built. His death left a power vacuum that would eventually be filled by his son, Cambyses II. While Cambyses was a capable ruler, he would never quite match the military brilliance and vision of his father. The Persian Empire, though vast, would soon face internal strife and external challenges that would threaten its stability. Nevertheless, the foundational principles of Cyrus's empire, tolerance, inclusion, and strategic leadership, would persist and influence future rulers for generations. While the Persian Empire would go on to thrive under later leaders, Cyrus's death marked the end of an era. His accomplishments and the empire he built, however, would continue to resonate throughout history. The legacy of the man who conquered the ancient Near East through a combination of military genius and compassionate governance would not be forgotten. The death of Cyrus the Great in 530 BCE sent shockwaves through the Persian Empire. For the first time in decades, the empire found itself without the visionary leader who had transformed it from a regional power into the largest empire the world had ever seen. Cyrus's death was not only a military loss, but also a blow to the cohesion and stability of the Persian Empire, which had been largely held together. Upon Cyrus's death, the question of succession became a matter of critical importance. Cyrus had not made clear arrangements for his succession, which led to uncertainty and potential instability within the empire. The throne passed to his son, Cambyses II, who had been serving as a military leader in Egypt at the time of his father's death. Although Cambyses was the natural heir, his legitimacy was not universally accepted. Some factions within the Persian nobility and the broader empire had supported the idea of Cyrus's grandson or another relative taking the throne, leading to a divided court. Cambyses II, while a capable ruler in his own right, was not the unifying force his father had been. His rule was marked by a more aggressive approach to governance and an inclination toward autocracy. This created tension within the royal court, and Cambyses was faced with the daunting challenge of securing his position while managing the massive Persian Empire left by his father. One of the most significant issues that Cambyses faced after assuming the throne was the looming threat of rebellion within the empire. Many of the territories Cyrus had conquered, such as the Medes and Babylonians, were accustomed to some degree of autonomy, and the sudden change in leadership prompted questions about the stability of their loyalty. Cyrus's respect for local customs and leaders had helped pacify these regions, but Cambyses's rule lacked the same diplomatic finesse, which led to growing unrest in some parts of the empire. One of the most immediate challenges Cambyses faced came from the Egyptian campaign. Following Cyrus's death, Cambyses focused his attention on consolidating power in the western part of the empire, particularly in Egypt, which had remained an independent kingdom despite Persian influence. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched a military campaign against Egypt, eventually leading to the conquest of the kingdom. While this was a military success, it came at a high cost, both in terms of resources and the alienation of many within his own empire. Cambyses's military campaigns, though successful in terms of territorial expansion, were also marked by brutality. His harsh treatment of the Egyptians, including the desecration of Egyptian religious sites and his self-proclaimed role as a divine ruler, drew the ire of many, especially among the more conservative factions of the Persian Empire who had admired Cyrus for his respect for local customs and religions. Cambyses's actions during this time further isolated him from key figures within the empire, making his rule a tumultuous one. Moreover, Cambyses's inability to handle the internal divisions and a lack of consensus on succession would lead to further instability. The absence of clear succession rules and his autocratic style fueled a climate of suspicion and intrigue within the royal court. There were reports of palace coups, and Cambyses, feeling insecure in his rule, became increasingly paranoid. According to historical sources, Cambyses' reign ended in tragedy when he died in 522 BCE, under circumstances that were shrouded in mystery, with some accounts suggesting he was the victim of an assassination orchestrated by a member of his own court. Despite his ambitious expansionist policies and military successes, Cambyses' rule marked the beginning of a turbulent period for the Persian Empire, as the empire's internal stability began to erode. The passing of Cyrus the Great, followed by Cambyses' reign, highlighted the difficulties of maintaining unity and cohesion in such a vast and diverse empire. It would take the leadership of Darius I, another successor of Cyrus, to restore order and bring a new phase of stability to the empire. Though Cambyses' reign was short and marked by challenges, it was a testament to the vastness of the Persian Empire and how difficult it would be to sustain a centralized system without the unifying force of a leader like Cyrus. His death set the stage for the internal struggles that would follow, and the eventual rise of Darius, who would go on to implement reforms that strengthened the empire and secured its legacy. Following the chaotic and uncertain period after Cyrus's death, the Persian Empire was on the brink of internal collapse. Cambyses II's death in 522 BCE left the empire without a strong and stable leader, and his rule had seen increasing unrest and instability within the realm. The Persian Empire, which had flourished under Cyrus's visionary leadership, was now facing a critical moment in its history. This moment would come to a head when Darius I, a distant cousin of Cyrus and a high-ranking member of the Persian military, rose to power in one of the most dramatic and consequential succession crises in ancient history. Darius's path to the throne was marked by bloodshed and political maneuvering. After Cambyses' death, a usurper named Gaumata, a man who claimed to be a false impersonator of Bardia, also known as Smerdis, a brother of Cambyses who had allegedly been killed by the king, seized control of the throne. Gaumata's claim was quickly accepted by a portion of the population, as many were disillusioned by Cambyses' rule. However, Gaumata's rule was brief and contested. His claim to the throne, although recognized by many, lacked legitimacy in the eyes of the Persian nobility and military leaders. Darius, who was a prominent general under Cyrus's descendants, recognized the threat posed by Gaumata's usurpation. He formed an alliance with other noble families within the Persian elite, including key military commanders, to challenge Gaumata's rule. In 522 BCE, Darius and his allies led a coup against the usurper, successfully overthrowing Gaumata and restoring the rightful line of succession. The coup was swift and effective, and Darius quickly established himself as the legitimate ruler of the Persian Empire. Darius's rise to power was a testament to his military prowess, political acumen, and ability to rally support from various factions within the empire. He not only defeated Gaumata, but also quelled a number of rebellions that broke out across the empire in the wake of Gaumata's rise. Many regions, including Persia, Media, and Babylon, had been in turmoil, and Darius needed to act quickly to restore order. He demonstrated remarkable leadership in suppressing these uprisings, securing his control over the empire and stabilizing Persian rule. Upon assuming the throne, Darius I immediately set about restoring order and implementing a series of significant reforms that would solidify his authority and ensure the long-term stability of the empire. His reign marked the beginning of a new era for Persia, one in which administrative and infrastructural improvements would help the empire thrive and expand even further. One of Darius's first major acts as king was to solidify the empire's administrative structure. He reformed the satrapy system that Cyrus had established, creating more effective oversight over the empire's vast regions. The satraps, or provincial governors, were now more tightly monitored by royal inspectors, ensuring that the provinces were more closely aligned with the central government in Persepolis. Darius introduced a more standardized system of taxation, which helped regulate the wealth coming into the empire and distributed resources more efficiently. Additionally, Darius's economic reforms were pivotal in consolidating the Persian Empire's strength. He introduced a unified currency system, which helped facilitate trade across the empire. The darik, a gold coin bearing the image of the king, became a symbol of Persian prosperity and was widely used for transactions. This coinage system created a common economic framework for the entire empire, making commerce and governance more efficient. Darius also prioritized the development of infrastructure, building roads, canals, and bridges that connected the vast expanse of the empire. The Royal Road, a network of roads stretching from the Persian heartland to the western borders of the empire, facilitated trade, communication, and military movement. The construction of the Canal of the Pharaohs, connecting the Nile River to the Red Sea, further strengthened Persia's control over the region and allowed the empire to expand its influence in Egypt. Darius's military campaigns were another important aspect of his reign. He launched successful campaigns to suppress rebellions and consolidate his power over newly acquired territories, such as Egypt, India, and Thrace. He also waged wars against the Greek city-states, which would eventually lead to the famous Persian Wars, and, though they did not result in immediate victory, they showcased Darius's long-term ambition for Persian dominance in the Mediterranean. Darius's reign, marked by these significant reforms, set the Persian Empire on a path of consolidation and expansion. Under his leadership, the empire not only survived the crisis following Cyrus's death, but emerged stronger than ever. His ability to restore order, implement effective governance, and expand the empire's reach ensured the survival of the Persian legacy. The reforms he introduced continued to shape the empire for generations and helped maintain Persia's dominance for more than 2 centuries after his death. Darius's reign, which began after the tumult of Gaumeda's usurpation, proved to be a turning point for the Persian Empire. While Darius was instrumental in stabilizing and strengthening the empire after the chaos following Cyrus's death, it is important to note that the foundation upon which Darius built his success had been laid by his predecessor, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus's policies, particularly his emphasis on tolerance, respect for local customs, and the establishment of a decentralized yet cohesive system of governance, became the blueprint for the empire's continued success. Darius's reforms and his military successes were undoubtedly significant, but it was the lasting legacy of Cyrus's vision of empire that truly ensured the long-term survival of the Persian Empire. Under Darius, the empire expanded further, incorporating new lands and peoples, but it also began to face external threats, most notably from the Greek city-states. The Greco-Persian Wars, which began during Darius's reign, would define much of the Persian Empire's future and its relations with the West. However, Darius's foresight in building a strong administrative infrastructure allowed the empire to withstand these external challenges. One of the most enduring aspects of Cyrus's vision was the concept of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. The Persian Empire under Cyrus had been a model of how diverse peoples could coexist, each with their own cultural identities and religious practices. While Darius's reign continued these policies of tolerance, his empire grew more complex as it expanded into regions with differing cultural norms and political structures. Darius himself would have to navigate these complexities with the same balance of respect for local customs and authority that had been a hallmark of Cyrus's rule. The Persian Empire, under both Cyrus and Darius, was united not by a single culture or religion, but by a shared allegiance to the king, a common system of law, and mutual economic interests. The ability to maintain unity in such a diverse empire was a remarkable achievement, and it laid the groundwork for the continued success of the Achaemenid dynasty. Cyrus's impact also extended beyond the realm of governance. His conquest of Babylon and his treatment of the Jewish people, particularly the Cyrus Cylinder, became symbols of humanitarian leadership. The Cyrus Cylinder's emphasis on religious freedom, justice, and the protection of human rights set an important precedent in the ancient world. It became, over time, a symbol of enlightened rule and is regarded by many as an early declaration of human rights. The principles outlined in the Cylinder influenced not only future Persian rulers, but also later civilizations that valued justice and the protection of diverse peoples. Moreover, the policies of cultural integration that Cyrus implemented allowed the arts, literature, and intellectual traditions to thrive within the Persian Empire. With the stability that Darius's rule brought, the Persian Empire became a crossroads for trade and culture. The Persian system of governance, which combined local autonomy with central control, allowed for the flourishing of both Persian and foreign cultures under its banner. Persian art, architecture, and philosophy thrived, and the legacy of Cyrus's inclusive rule helped to make the empire a center of intellectual and cultural exchange. Darius's reign, though marked by conflict with the Greeks, is often seen as the peak of the Persian Empire's power. However, it was Cyrus's vision that laid the groundwork for the empire's success, both during his reign and under his successors. The empire that Cyrus built, based on the principles of tolerance, respect, and cooperation, became a model for future empires and continues to influence modern notions of empire and governance. In the end, the Persian Empire, despite the challenges it faced in the centuries following Cyrus's death, endured for over 2 centuries, lasting until its conquest by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE. The foundation laid by Cyrus and expanded by Darius ensured that Persia would remain a central player in world history for generations. The legacy of Cyrus's vision for an empire of unity, tolerance, and justice continues to resonate in the historical memory of the Persian Empire, making him one of the most significant and enduring figures in the history of the ancient world.